This is Jasmine Morning. Didn't Sadiq Khan say he was leaving the UK if Trump got into office? Yes. Where is your plane ticket, Sadiq?
I've got some cash spare.
I've got some cash spare. Should we have a whip round?
Why not?
Yeah, excellent. Nick, I hope it goes really well. I hope the show is fantastic. Thank you very much indeed to all of you for your brilliant comments, particularly about who you would deport if you had the authority to deport people. Thank you very much for your company this morning. I'll be back next weekend from 6 on Saturday. Join me then. Nick's next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome. What a great start that we've just had there from the great Dr. David, and now you're with me for today. I don't know how that sits with you, but poor old Peter Cardwell, he's still not well, but he will be back soon. And I have the pleasure of sitting in, as I have did yesterday and today. Coming up, Theo Usherwood, great political commentator. He'll be here later on in the show, and we'll be looking at the political review. And boy, it's all happening there, isn't it? Shall I just mention Sadiq Khan to get your pulse pumping at a faster rate? We'll be talking about that and other things, of course. And Roy Lilly will join us, of course, well known to this station, great expert in the NHS. And we're going to be taking a look at this latest set of pictures that have appeared in the Mirror, I believe it is, which is coverage from one hospital. I think it's Epsom Hospital off the top of my head, talking about beds in corridors and actually saying how shocking this is. Well, I don't know about your experience, but I want to know about your experience because, frankly, it's not shocking to me at all. It is absolutely dreadful, but it's endemic. It's pretty much everywhere as far as I can tell. If that's not the case, tell me. My local hospital, Harlow, I've been in more corridors than I've been on more wards there. It's having exactly the same problems that are described in the paper. And what's your thoughts about what is the solution? Because I'm sorry, I don't know about you. As I said yesterday, I'm coming up to the state pension age. I've been hearing how awful things are at Christmas for a very, very long time. What are your thoughts about how to fix the NHS? And how is it at your local hospital? Meanwhile, 24 hours to go until America embraces a deregulation agenda, cutting through the bureaucracy, an entrepreneurial spirit. A new vibe is going through America now, even before President Trump has been sworn in. He's receiving a welcome from all sorts of people. Yes, of course, world leaders, no doubt, queuing up to praise him. And alongside that, of course, the entrepreneurs, many of who wouldn't have gone near him a few weeks ago until he got elected, like the Zuckerbergers from Facebook and elsewhere, all paying homage to Donald Trump. One man isn't, Sadiq Khan. He's launched a rather extraordinary attack about the rise of the right, clearly with Donald Trump in mind, as well as other European parties. I'm not quite sure why the leader of the largest, I think the most successful capital in the world, has decided to launch this attack. And also, didn't he have a lot to say when Elon Musk was launching his attack about foreigners interfering in our politics? So the Mayor of London has decided to stomp the international stage. What do you make of that? Do you think anyone's bothered by what he says, as he issues a rallying cry against the right, whoever they may be? And as the ceasefire begins late, admittedly, in the Middle East, we'll be talking to Ashley Bakshi, who is the cousin of Abgam Berger, who I suppose we are all hoping will be on the list of the first 33 hostages who are due to be released over the next 42 days. And we'll be getting first-hand talk there. But it also means in the first hour, I will eventually be joined by Claire Muldoon, who's doing her very best to be here, but I am joined by Johnny Gould.
Always good to see you, Nick. How are you doing?
I know, and do you know what? I'm going to be really boring for people about just sport, brief second. I owe you big time. I'm a Liverpool fan, as you know. I was getting nervous that the gap at the top of the table was narrowing a little bit, and you put Arsenal in their place. The Gooners are gone, as far as I'm concerned, with a great draw yesterday.
It does seem like they're choking again, although they don't like the sight of us. They don't like it up 'em.
No.
They should have won the game.
Yes.
We came back late, opportunist goal, but we have our own agenda, thanks very much. We're 2 points off the Champions League. Aston Villa's still in this season's Champions League. It's not Monte Carlo or bust for us.
Sorry, you misunderstand me. Not interested
You don't
with
care,
Villa
do you?
at all. You just really served Liverpool well. You've given us the championship today.
Let's
Enough
see.
of this. Enough of this
Let's
before
see.
the producer goes, we're not talking sport. I just wanted to share my pleasure with you. Listen, on a day that I imagine is actually quite hard for many people, you know, in Gaza and in Israel, but particularly let's talk about Israel. You've now got the ceasefire that has kicked off 3 hours late this morning for reasons that I think are all to do with the pre-announcement of which hostages would be released today from Gaza. But it's happened. Let me just ask you, what do you think the mood and sense is in Israel? Is it torn between fear of the future, jubilation, and some would say they're not happy with the ceasefire at all?
The ceasefire agreement is a tragedy for almost every Israeli. It is a deeply grievous cost that is being paid. The terrorists of Hamas know that it hurts Israelis, it hurts the Jewish people around the world, it hurts people who believe in freedom and Western values all over the world. And only 3 names have been declared so far. One of them is a British national. It's Emily Damari. I've had the privilege of meeting her.
She's the only British national remaining, isn't
who's
she?
alive there. Now,
yeah.
Emily is incarcerated, for 450 days. The last time we heard that she was alive was March 2024. Her name is on the list. God willing, she is physically living. We don't even know that. I've met Mandy. She's originally from Beckenham in Kent as a young woman. She met and married a young Israeli and brought up a British-Israeli family on the kibbutz in the south, right near the Gaza border. And it was that terrible morning, October the 7th, when Emily was taken brutally. She was shot and survived. Her dog was killed. The keys to her car were stolen. She was bundled into the back of her own car and driven into Gaza. And let's make no moral equivalence between who is being released on one side and who is being released on the other. In the past few hours, we have been handed these 734 lists of people from Palestinian...
That's 734 Palestinians, is it,
Yeah.
who will be released over the next 42 days?
Correct. Convicted criminals. And among them is Ahmad Barghouti, a close aide and cousin of Marwan Barghouti, sentenced to 13 life terms for leading what's called a murder machine that carried out attacks in 12 different Israeli places like the seafood markets. These are attacks on Israeli civilians.
So there must be a sense, Johnny, there must be a sense of the mission of the Israeli Prime Minister, Netanyahu, was to eliminate Hamas. That hasn't happened. Is that presumably people are just terrified that they'll come back again another day?
And indeed, the October the 7th tragedy was precipitated by a hostage and prisoner release. One of the prisoners that was released was Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind of October the 7th, in exchange for one Israeli prisoner, meaning, well, not a prisoner, a hostage, Gilad Shalit.
Who was a soldier, I think.
A soldier, yes, a conscript soldier. And this is going to happen again. It is a deep and grievous cost. There's another element to this, which is that Israel has lost 800 soldiers in this battle, both north and south. And the families of the IDF soldiers have campaigned together, protested outside Knesset, saying Jewish blood is not cheap. And they don't mean just Jewish blood. IDF soldiers come from every community because Israel is a multi-ethnic society. There are Jews and Muslims and Christians and Druze. Everyone serves in the Israeli army.
But Johnny, people will be saying reports, admittedly, from Hamas themselves, the so-called health reports, the department in Gaza, that 47,000 lives is enough. Now, I think Israel acknowledges at least 17,000 of those, they reckon, were combatants, but lots of civilians have been killed in Gaza, and therefore the pressure was inevitable, and it seems Donald Trump applied the pressure for the ceasefire. I mean, blood has been spilled everywhere, really,
yes,
isn't it?
The numbers have been debunked, not least by Andrew Fox of the Henry Jackson Society, and it is a very low ratio of citizens against combatants. I mean, it doesn't make it better, but the number is not 47,000. It is an oft-repeated, UNRWA-sponsored lie.
Which is what I was very clear to make out there.
It's best to say that.
There is nevertheless a proportionality, of course, with this, which I think even Israel themselves accept, that if you're going after, you know, terrorists in this situation who are basically hiding themselves amongst refugees,
yes,
there's going to be a high price. But that proportionality, which is accepted, if you like, by Israel as a consequence of the war, I suppose it's come to a head simply because of the high numbers that are involved. This is simply people recognising that there seemed to be no end to eliminating Hamas because it was an impossible deal. We had Alistair Burt on yesterday, former Minister of the Middle East, saying actually the Israeli cabinet and Prime Minister were being told to eliminate Hamas is actually an impossible dream that you can't do.
Look, it has been reduced to a guerrilla organisation, if that's the word. And even the meeting in Doha between the highest level of Israeli society, the Shabak, which is the Homeland Security, and indeed Mossad, both heads are there. They are meeting representatives of Hamas, and even that is an intelligence mission because all the kind of chiefs of Hamas have been taken out, like Ismail Haniyeh, who was taken out in Iran, Yahya Sinwar, who was the Gazan leader. So the people that they're meeting will give them a drill down, some kind of organizational understanding of who they are dealing with. Meanwhile, Israel is still losing soldiers on the battlefield. And as Andrew Fox, who I've spoken to many, many times, who is a professional soldier, he knows the difference between who is a professional soldier and who is a conscript. And a lot of these boys, and indeed some girls as well, have been lost. They are teenagers. They were hairdressers yesterday or small business owners, and they are urged to fight in an urban environment, which not even five-star generals have much experience of. And tragically, as Andrew has told me, this will be the growth area as the world becomes more urbanized and Islamist terror moves from rural environments into urban places.
Okay,
It's the future. Tragically, this is the future of war.
Whilst we're making good use of the time, I want to just explore a little bit with you about where the ceasefire goes. So we've got this first stage, 42 days. You've got some members, and indeed Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister himself, saying, if I'm given cause to, I'm going to attack again. Stage one is only stage one, but he's got members of his cabinet saying, come what may, you should attack after you've got these hostages back. What prospect do you think this ceasefire has of holding?
I think we've got to try and understand how many of the hostages will be released who are living. No one is left behind. That is the Israeli philosophy. No one of their citizens, be whatever religion they are, whether they've been rescued or indeed negotiated out, it doesn't matter their ethnicity if they are Israeli citizens. And interestingly enough, the old man Oded Lifshitz, who's 84 years old, he's the oldest surviving, I say surviving, hostage.
Okay.
And there is a whole family, the Bibas family, who were taken completely, including a 9-month-old baby. And that child, who is now, I think, 2 years old...
Spent more of his life as a hostage.
Yeah. And God willing, he hasn't been taken in by a family and started to be radicalised as an enemy of the Jewish people, for example. I mean, that is one of the thoughts going on. We literally don't know whether these people are dead or alive.
So
but one thing's for sure is I do think that this time, because of what happened with Yahya Sinwar, that these terrorists that have been released will be got after, will be chased around, and
so no place to hide.
There will be no place to hide.
But
no.
And do you think that bodes well, that you'll actually get to stage 3 of this ceasefire, which is when you start talking about reconstruct and the future?
Yes.
But no real talk, probably too early, of what a future security of Israel's settlement looks like. You know, are we talking two-state solution? This is precisely what Alistair Burt was saying. We've never really tried it, so we've got to try it.
There is no one on the Palestinian side that Israel can meaningfully negotiate with. The Palestinian Authority is on the edge of a possible civil war of control between Hamas and the PA. There are 3 zones in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. Zone C is built for Israelis. Religious Jews usually create towns and cities in those environments. Zone B apparently is designed for Palestinian elders of the community to run, and Zone A is under the auspices of the Palestinian Authority, and that is where 19 years into a 4-year term, the man who refuses to go and die, Abu Mazen, who is I think 89 years old, is still approximately running the tyranny that's in that area.
But we also heard yesterday that there's 57 Arab states who, you know, would be, if you like, the push to drive for a two-state solution that secured Israel's future as well. I mean, do you take any comfort from that?
They're a bit scarce, let's just say that. I mean, when this first happened, I started doing special shows here, how to make peace in the Middle East, and I pled with the Gulf states, the Abraham Accords signatory states, for example, the UAE and Bahrain, to be involved in the mediation of the build.
Were, of course, what was actually a lot of progress with the relationship with Israel that was taking place, and some argue that progress prompted Iran and Hamas to launch the attack on Israel in the first place. I'll just give some context.
Well, that is tragically true. The Palestinians, they felt, were being ignored, and so they very much put themselves back on the agenda with this brutal terror attack, this pogrom, this disaster of the morning of October the 7th. And what Trump was trying to do, and what he has succeeded in doing, is creating a normalization which is on the agenda between the UAE and Bahrain, that Saudi understands this, but there will have to be a major security arrangement, a deal with the Saudis and the United States for them to come on board. And the Saudis keep on saying that there must be some kind of settlement between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I'm not sure why they say that, because they don't like the Palestinians. They don't see them even as fellow Arabs, but it is part of their modus operandi in order to exact some kind of price out of America.
Let's just keeping an eye on the clock there. Barry's just said, I think he's saying, I live in Northern Ireland, Johnny, and he lives in Northern Ireland, and know how you feel. It's hard to watch Murder Has Been Released, and I'm exasperated by seeing some of them now in our government here. That's what Barry. If you'd like to join the conversation, 0344 499 1000. We've kicked off, unsurprisingly, with my guest Johnny Gould here talking about the latest developments in the ceasefire in Israel. We're going to be moving on to some other subjects, not least the NHS reform, picking up an offer of a $10 million donation whilst they were out celebrating Donald Trump's inauguration. I mean, is there anything that is going to stop reform? We're also going to be talking about Donald Trump's threats, or implied threats, that he's not happy with the idea of Peter Mandelson being selected as ambassador to America on behalf of the United Kingdom. And of course, we'll be talking about Sadiq Khan warning Western democracy is now at risk from resurgent fascism. Beautifully timed with the inauguration of Donald Trump. What is he getting at, I wonder there? You can join the conversation, 0344 499 1000. I'll take your calls as soon as they come in. Or you can send a message on WhatsApp, 0344 499 1000.
Under the deal, 33 Israeli hostages still held by Hamas in Gaza.
The Sun newspaper was better at monitoring and affecting.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And a very good Sunday morning to you. I'm Nick Bois, in for Peter Cardwell this morning, who I'm sure will be back with you very soon. But in the meantime, I'm also joined by Johnny Gould, who you've been hearing from, and the great Claire Muldoon. You made it.
I did make it.
Wonderful.
TfL just needs to get the journey planner sorted for
Which
that
could
Jubilee
neatly
line.
bring us on to Sadiq Khan, but I won't make that link just yet.
I'll make another one for you, Nick, later. Don't you worry.
Listen, I've been asking lots of you to share with me your experiences also of the NHS and the revelation of these photos of lots of people waiting in the corridors. I'm frankly surprised that anyone thinks that that's shocking news. It's happening pretty much everywhere from my experience. One in here from David. Nick, I collapsed with the loss of blood through internal bleeding. I was ambulanced to A&E for tests and it took 35 hours to find a bed for me. Wow. Do share with me your experiences, because I don't know. I really want to understand the picture, if it really is rare what we're seeing in the newspapers or it is far more common. And if you get time, I would point you to the Sunday Times, where there's a brilliant article from Peter Cardy, their European editor, about his experiences in the French system. Why are we so reluctant to actually learn from our closest neighbours? You know, it's nothing to do with the European Union. They've just got it sussed. Anyway, let's talk, if I may, about Donald Trump threatening to embarrass Keir Starmer moments after the inauguration, because apparently he's very unhappy at the prospect of Peter Mandelson. Claire, what do you think of Peter Mandelson as an ambassador for the United Kingdom?
Not much.
Okay,
Not
why?
much, because he's so entrenched in the whole New Labour thing about being in the EU and everything else. And I think his past record would show that he doesn't actually have Britain's interests at heart. Peter Mandelson is a man motivated by money and money only, and what's in it for him. I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. I read his book. What was it called? The Prince of Darkness or something?
OK, well, just before we go to you, Johnny, let's bring Gemma in. I think Gemma's on the line from Staffordshire. Gemma, I think you want to talk about Trump rejecting Mandelson as well, yeah?
Yes,
what would you like to say?
Well, I want to know, I don't want Peter Mandelson to be the ambassador to America either, for basically the same similar reasons to what Claire suggested. But I would like to know what Donald Trump's reasons are. Do you know?
Well, I can only tell you what has been reported in the papers, and they've been, been attributed to his closest advisors. And I'm afraid Claire's kind of summed up what they think. They think he is very much part of an establishment that they don't really want any part of. And it's also a little bit of a rebuke to Keir Starmer, from what I can understand. Now, the interesting thing is, I hadn't realised that the head of a country could actually reject an ambassador.
I didn't know that either.
Well, he did it in the first term. Remember Ambassador Darroch?
Did he?
Completely,
Kim Darroch, yes.
Trump basically had a fit on Twitter and in a couple of news conferences, and Darroch went home with his tail between his legs. The same with Mandelson here. Whether he actually carries it through or whether he emasculates him just by using the power of his media outreach, time will tell. But there's no doubt Mandelson comes from a completely different establishment place, as you hinted at. He's into China, as this new Labour government are. Trump's not into China. China is a threat to the United States. It's a threat to peace. Trump believes in international commerce more than war. And he's already shown, even before he's got into office, what he believes in stopping the fighting.
It's quite interesting.
That's his thing. And Mandy's not that guy.
You see, Gemma, I actually think... Mandelson is a chameleon, and he'll sell his soul to the highest bidder and do a good job on that, in the sense as he can convert. If he was instructed for the right job and the right glory to suddenly go anti-EU or anti-China, I fully would expect him to do it.
But isn't it?
But there's more to it, actually, and Gemma was asking me the question, so I'll just play it back to you, and if you think this is true. Gemma, the other reason is that his closest advisors to Donald Trump are saying, hang on, the Labour Party need a bit of a smack on the wrist, because they sent over 100 people to try and defeat our new president. They have these views, clearly anti him, that we want to see the back, and we want to give them a slap on the wrist. So I think that's what's behind it, Gemma.
Right, so what I would say to Donald Trump, if I could speak to him, which I can't...
He might be listening.
Via Twitter, Gemma, you can have a go.
Yeah, can he choose our ambassador for us, and then we will not. We won't have to. It'd be easier, wouldn't it?
Well, I think
he'd
probably want Nigel Farage, but no, he can't choose. I don't think he can nominate someone, but he could theoretically reject someone.
I wonder if he could put up like 10 people that he would consider, and then we could kind of fight it out between ourselves and then suggest it to Donald Trump and see if...
Who would you like to see, Gemma?
Really, this is ridiculous.
Who would you like to see as our ambassador?
What, to America?
Yeah.
Okay, this is really difficult for me because I haven't actually thought about this question, but off the top of my head, somebody diplomatic like Peter Cardwell. He'd be pretty good.
Really? Do you know, I'd support that, then I could do the show for him.
Yeah.
And I think Peter Cardwell for ambassador. Gemma, love the call. Thank you very much indeed. It's true, though. It's a pretty tactless thing to send over 100 people of the Labour Party to go and try and not to interfere in an election.
But that's been done
in
previous administrations by other previous administrations. Okay, so let's not make for me that's a non-issue.
But they've taken umbrage at it. You should read the man. You see, Donald Trump is not an ordinary politician.
No, he's not.
He would take umbrage at something like that.
Of course he would. But back to Peter Mandelson.
Yes.
He said last summer there's no way he's going to take any roles at all. It's almost as if the same when Starmer said he came out with his support for Tulip Sadiq and said no, full confidence. Next day she was gone. He also said it worth noting, though, he's got his full confidence in Rachel from Accounts as well. So that might be foreboding for the next few months in that. But tomorrow, the inauguration of President Trump-elect. It's a new day.
How do you feel? I am genuinely, much more than I thought I would be. In a way, I'm actually more excited about this than I thought I would be.
I am too, and he's won through the card.
Yeah.
Okay, he's won through the demography. There aren't great surprises about certain groups coming out and voting for him. He won this election convincingly. The era
Didn't
of
stop
the woke...
them protesting yesterday. Apparently 5,000 women turned up
Freedom
to have
of
a protest.
speech. Freedom of speech. Let them do it.
And when people like Sadiq Khan warn Western democracies are at risk because of resurgent fascism, I'm afraid that kind of discussion has to stop. We know that Trump and Khan and Starmer are apart. We know that Labour are ideologues, divisive ideologues in many, many issues. But the election has the Americans have spoken. He's won through the card, and he is slightly more magnanimous in his approach, I think, as he comes to power this time, because he has a much wider mandate. And beware Starmer and Khan making these silly comments, because not only does he have the power of office and executive order, he has also an incredible media outreach. New media outreach.
Is it Starmer or is it just Khan trying to push Starmer to be more critical?
No, it's just both of them.
Because Starmer's trying to behave and be a grown-up and be very boring.
He's a robot. He doesn't know how to.
He is a robot.
He really is. He doesn't know how to, Nick. But just briefly...
He doesn't have ideas, really, does he? Beyond his ideals.
No, I was in America. I was in New York for New Year, and I can't tell you the transformation with the New Yorkers. They are full of hope and life, and the taxi drivers were... so full on. They voted for this man to be the president, and there's never been so much hope in the country. New York's typically Democrat as well.
Well, it is, but I just want to throw this in because I'm going to be yelled at to go to a break in a minute, I think. I've forgotten when all the times are. I've come out of retirement for this, so I'll just wait till I'm yelled at. But I'm going to put this word, nationalism, or shall we say patriotism, pride.
Yeah.
We don't get that in our elections. We don't have leaders, really. Perhaps Boris Johnson did it somewhat, but we don't have leaders who stand up and said, I'm going to make our country great. I believe in our country,
That's
with the
far
passion.
right, Nick. Don't be silly.
And isn't that the problem?
That's been blamed as being far right.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. So that's the answer to my question, is really the more you hear from people like Sadiq Khan trying to close down the conversation and stop, if you like, people... He would say using populism, which I've always thought is a good concept. If you're in politics, you want to be reasonably popular.
Yeah.
But it is that people have pride and it motivates them.
Yes.
And Trump gets that, doesn't he?
Yes, and Colonel Richard Kemp once said to me that there's nothing wrong with patriotism because it is actually the politics of self-interest. Self-interest builds a patriotism. And there are countries which are forced to be patriotic more than perhaps the complacency of those people who voted Remain in other countries. For example, Singapore, Taiwan, Israel. You know, there is a patriotism because it's about self-interest and it's about existential survival. So if we live in that environment where perhaps we are under serious threat from Putin, for example, then maybe patriotism might return to the agenda and crush
Last
this
word
thing.
before the break to you, Claire.
Guinness.
Guinness.
The Irish...
Would you like a Guinness?
Oh, I'd love a Guinness, a really lovely cold.
2 Guinnesses, please.
But the Irish
Free.
have always substantially had more patriotism all over the world. They've been all over the world in boats and everything, right, as immigrants. They have St. Patrick's Day parades across America, here, everywhere. No one in their right mind would blast that as right-wing.
Well, let's be
Or far right.
outrageously
Exactly.
patriotic, and you can be left-wing patriotic in this studio, right-wing, okay?
Any wing.
But exactly.
Chicken wings.
Stop trying to politicise being patriotic about your country.
Yeah.
Now, listen, Claire, you need to get a relative listening, because I think that's what Johnny's done, but there's actually a serious tweet here. Good morning, Nick. How privileged we are to have Johnny on this morning, so well-informed and very empathetic. This is obviously talking about Israel and Gaza, praying all the Jewish hostages are released quickly, says Rachel, and that's not Rachel
From accounts.
It wouldn't be her.
No, it definitely wouldn't be. Not
Thank you, Rachel.
well, I'm sure she would, actually. No, I want to be careful what I say. I've just implied she would not be want the hostages released, so I'm sure she does. 03444 499 1000. If you want to see a commentator really cock things up, yeah, I'm here. Join the conversation. Join me. Next, we'll be talking about the NHS, and I'm desperate to hear more of your stories about the NHS, and I'd love to hear your solutions. Give me a call, 03444 499 1000. I'll read out some of the messages I've got as well. Join me here, Nick Bois, with Claire Muldoon and Johnny Gould on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And welcome back. I'm joined here by Claire Muldoon and Johnny Gould. We're going to be talking NHS in a second. Just read out a few messages from you. Dan from Kent. Nationalism is extreme left or extreme right. Nazi stands for National Socialism, for instance. Patriotism is a lighter version of nationalism, says Dan. John says, John Carmichael, Nick Khan is a fine one to write about fascism when he point-blank refuses to work with reform councillors in a cross-party move against knife crime. Lots of people talking about that, actually. Lots of political posturing going on there at the cost of something that is hugely important. Nick, Trump has already saved us $9 billion regarding Chagos, and via Musk exposed the rape grooming gangs cover-up. And we also have our next Prime Minister, Nigel Farage, having a direct line to Trump, which is the only bright spot for UK, as next 4 years will be dreadful for the UK, says Paul from Hartlepool. I went and did a programme up in Hartlepool, actually, all on politics. Fascinating time.
Did you have guacamole or mushy peas?
I definitely had mushy peas. I can tell you, I spent several months there with the misspent youth back in the late 70s in Hartlepool. I'm very fond of the place.
Yeah.
But I won't be discussing that on air. Right, now look, in the Daily Mirror, they have been exposing lots of photographs that are genuinely quite shocking, I think, particularly in the sense that the corridors are packed. They're not just someone in the corridor. They are packed. They are heaving. They're even stacking up in front of reception. And the A&E doctors there were saying, essentially, it's a normal day. Now, my point is, I'm kind of pleased it's out there, but I am convinced this is happening in so many places. They've kind of identified one hospital. I'm going to call out my hospital, and if they want to ring back, they can. Harlow. I mean, I was there with my mother-in-law. She had a very nice corridor, as it happens. The staff, they were doing their very best. They were trying to remember that these were people. But when you are stuck in a corridor, you have indignity, you have uncertainty, you don't really know. You can be forgotten. And there's lots of people who are left on their own. They don't all have relatives with them. And the contrast I'm making is that in the Times, which I wouldn't have expected you to read, there's a brilliant article that talks in detail about the French system. And basically what it comes down to is no significant waiting times, and nowhere near the sort of problems we have. You get to see your doctors really quickly. And they have a combination of a social insurance scheme, like the Dutch, that means if you're unemployed or a certain qualifications, you're not paying anything and you get free access to cover. And you have the contributory scheme that is mandatory, that either goes through employers or individuals, and you all have a stake in the health service without this sort of blind sum of 180 billion a year from general taxation and many people actually abusing the system. And yet, even Labour, in their zeal for reform, are not prepared to discuss means and ways of changing how we fund it. I'm fed up with this.
But that's not going to change. It's not funding that's the issue with the NHS, Nick. It's management of it. And yes, they're in.
OK, so how do you deal with that? I mean, how many governments have you heard, Claire, say, we're going to cut the managers, we're going to cut the bureaucracy?
Well, I'll tell you what they can start by doing. Bringing back matrons, cleaning the hospitals, telling people that they do not go to A&E, present to A&E, unless they have had an accident or it is an emergency.
Still doing it, aren't they?
They are doing it because of the broken system to get them there. It's almost like a triage. You can't get a GP appointment. What are you told then? If symptoms worsen, dial 111.
Yes.
You dial 111, and because of fear of litigation or fear of doing anything wrong or fear of making a mistake, they will always say the default is go to hospital. That needs to stop.
That is true.
It needs to start with the surgery. It really does. And you get to a call at certain surgeries and they say, I'm sorry you're ill on a Saturday. That's no good. Go straight to A&E or call 111. Right.
Okay.
Which is why we've got overflowing A&E wards.
That's the reason.
Interestingly enough, where there is infrastructure which is allowed to be built, surgeries are becoming bigger. I'll give you an example. In a completely new district and postcode of Eastbourne at Sovereign Harbour, there is a surgery which looks like a little hospital. It's about
Is this what they call polyclinics?
Yeah, and it looks like you could go in there and you could go behind a curtain and it looks like it's got a little hospital bed and maybe even, I don't know if it's overnight, but it looks more substantial than a little surgery where a doctor says, how can I help you? That sounds bad, take some tablets. It looks like it's more substantial. So we have to take off the pressure. The surgery has to be where the start of your healthcare journey goes, the A&E
All right,
units
so-
are out of control.
Let me pick up on a couple of points you made, Claire, because also very helpfully in this article it talked about the level of funding per head of population and then look at the number of beds and look at outcomes. We were low in all of those, including the level of funding. And my own theory is if you revamp the funding and didn't just rely on general taxation, you would find that people who would be actually topping up their insurance to different levels. I don't know what the benefits would be. Right against a system where no one is denied at the social insurance system. And interestingly, what Wes Streeting's got right, but I have absolutely no confidence that the government will deliver it or the civil service, is the technology. They have an app system in France where basically you can go on and book an appointment with your GP. You can choose from any GP, any cardiologist, any particular therapy, and you book it and you go, and you will have one of these insurance things. They're getting seen within 24 hours of being treated, and they can even put you into. So I think it's technology and I think it's process,
Look,
but I think it's about.
I'm just fed up with the NHS being used as a political football. I really am. A lot of non-emergency and a lot of if you wanted a nose job, if you want liposuction, you want something else, that's not the job of the NHS to fix that.
But that is politics, because no one's prepared to stop that.
But that's not political, that's common sense, surely. Cross-party, NHS, get it sorted, right? And it's easy to do, and get rid of the Luddite IT systems that they've got. And the NHS app, ditch it, because it's harvesting details that really will be stored and sold.
If technology is part of the solution, and you ditch the technology.
I'm ditching one part of it. I'm ditching the app part of it.
Look how it works in France. It's brilliant.
No, well, I would
Don't try it.
Cease and desist.
I think apps are unstoppable as a solution.
Well, but did you not hear about
You're
the AI?
Claire's a Luddite.
Starmer, I've been called worse. Starmer has said only the other week that he wants us to be the head of the AI, artificial intelligence. He wants our data harvested. It's called Horizon Planning. And it's called Horizon Planning for a really good reason. Everything that could possibly happen has happened in the past. So what they will do is get all the data up, all the data in, and feed that. Two issues: who stores it, how long's it stored, and thirdly, who owns it?
Do you remember
That's
the data?
frightening.
Do you remember the Data Protection Act?
GDPR.
Yeah,
remember that day we sat through all our emails saying, "Do not agree,
Yes.
decline, decline,
it's been
decline."
completely roughshod, run over, completely.
Have you ever read a GDPR policy? Have you ever? Seriously?
I declined it.
I tell you, I had to read it once. Didn't understand a word of it. Still don't. Right. Okay. Now, have I got time to take a call, everyone, or have I got to go to a break? Great. Let's go and talk to Chris in Epsom. Hello, Chris. I have permission to speak to you, and you'd like to talk about hospital.
Well, I had a bit to say, so I'll try and get it out quick.
Go on, then. You fire away.
I've been caring for my mother and father for 5 years. Unfortunately, I lost my father 18 months ago. My mother's seriously ill with Parkinson's and dementia and bedbound. So I've been in and out of Epsom Hospital quite a bit.
Right.
Now, it is a very good hospital. The A&E department is very good. I don't think I've ever waited more than a couple of hours. The last time I was there with my mother, she was held in resusc. She'd had a total collapse due to an upper respiratory infection. I have never seen so many beds, extra beds, put down the corridors, across the front of reception, down the side rooms used. There was at least 20 beds. I just counted them up with your producer. There was at least 20 extra beds. I said, how are you coping? You just to staff the extra.
And what was their answer? What was their answer, Chris?
They were just coping. I mean, there was, and the problem is, it's like with my mum. She's 88. I think everybody there was a silver fox. I didn't see any young people. You know, whether it was just as it was getting cold.
Chris,
coming down with infections, and it was terrible. And also, I've got to tell you this: don't fall for the French thing. I've got a friend of mine was involved in the French government, and the cost to them is huge, but they lose it.
What do you mean they lose it?
They lose it off the balance sheet.
OK, listen, I did want to dig into that with you, but I can't because of time reasons. So, Chris, keep listening to that because I intend to come back to the French thing. And if possible, we'll even try and get you back on the line to talk a little bit more about that because I'm a little sceptical of that, but it's entirely possible. Chris in Epsom, thanks very much for giving us his experience there. I think if I kept these lines open for 8 hours, all I'd actually ever hear is just what's wrong. I think getting to the solution is harder, isn't it?
And we'd have a waiting list on the phone line as well.
But it's not new. People have been in corridors.
OK, well, we'll try and solve it after the break. Coming up, more of Claire Muldoon and Johnny Gould with me, Nick Dubois, here on Talk.
As far as I'm aware, the well was poisoned in many respects in the negotiations that Theresa May did. I think she set up hurdles, or her team set up hurdles, which then made it very difficult for the United Kingdom to get what it wanted. The passport checks being perhaps one of them, but the most notable one, of course, was taking the bended knee to the notion, conceding that point that gave the EU the upper hand in negotiations over Northern Ireland and therefore the entire United Kingdom.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you for all your messages and phone calls. I'm trying to get to them as quickly as I can, and I still will. I'm fascinated by your insights into the NHS, but I'd also like to share with you, do you agree with Claire? I'd like to ask you this. Do you agree with Claire that actually money isn't the issue? It's true, we're spending more than ever on the NHS. In fact, I think it makes that 350 million extra a day from the referendum dwarfed by the amount we're spending now. So is the problem really money, or is it how we're spending it? And what can we learn from places like France and Holland and elsewhere? Why are we so wedded to the idea that free at the point of delivery means it must be government money with a system run by government? Free at point of delivery is being delivered in all these countries I'm talking about, France, Holland and elsewhere. Okay, so that is not the point. Should we be prepared to look at how we fund it as well? 03444 991 1000. Speaking of funding, So Reform go out to have a party and join the celebrations of Donald Trump. And Nick Candy let slip on his Twitter, well, I don't think he let slip, I think he was quite happy to talk about it, that someone's offered him $10 million to help oust Keir Starmer and get Reform into power. Fascinating about this is that the report goes on to suggest that Trump's advisors, Trump's party, are assisting and advising Reform on how to win elections, and the message is simple: don't forget the little guys, the left behinds.
Yes, and what Trump's 2 elections have shown is that you can be an insurgent within a party and win. What Reform are doing appears to be much, much more difficult, changing a 150-year political consensus with a completely new party. Because if Farage wanted to attempt to do what Trump has done, he would join the Conservative parties and lead from the front.
Well, half of the party members, Claire, of the Conservative Party members, think there should be a merger or alliance.
Yes.
And in general polling, even though Reform were in 3rd in the last one on 22% compared to 26% for Conservative and Labour, most people thought Farage should be Prime Minister.
Isn't that a frightening thought? Can you imagine?
Is it a frightening
well,
thought?
It
Why
is
is it
because
frightening?
Starmer's more frightening.
Well, Starmer is just the worst nightmare ever, apart from Peter Mandelson. It's
Has he offended you in the past life?
Well, it's almost as if it's Halloween every day. Anyway, it's shocking. Because I tell you why. Farage is a great politician in that he's a great orator. He is able to go like that with his finger and touch, what the political platform, feel the heat that he needs to address. When he's speaking to party members, indeed when he's speaking even in question time, and when he's speaking in general, he's always got a message. And he says it with such bon vivant, it's very difficult not to be taken up by it. However, and here's the punch, what are the manifesto promises of the Reform Party? I don't believe they've actually published anything. I don't think they've actually got. Well,
they had a manifesto at the
substance.
election, didn't they? Which did have gaps in it financially. They deny that. But what I'm saying is they had broad brush strokes.
Well, it was never robustly defended, nor was it adequately put through the microscope. Yeah, it wasn't scrutinised enough.
But it certainly will be next time.
Indeed, it will be, and I think that's.
Is there any other leader that would make you more convinced of Reform, or is your issue Reform?
My issue is Reform. And I think the other underlying... we spoke about Keir Starmer being flip-flopping around the place. Farage has started to do this. Now look at Elon Musk, Tommy Robinson. There are main issues here that are not being addressed. Now, the chaos has now moved from that to President Trump elects inauguration tomorrow.
He called out Musk on Tommy Robinson, didn't he?
Well... Did he? This is the whole thing.
He made himself unpopular with some of his own supporters.
But no to joining Conservatives, the Reform and Conservatives back together. I think that, not back together.
Johnny, it's true. The Conservative, if you were Kemi Badenoch, she has got a point, and I know we don't hear much of her these days, but she's got a point when she says, I don't think there should be, if you like, a partnership with Reform, because they've made it their mission to destroy the Conservative Party.
Yes, they have. And
the Conservatives destroyed themselves.
Yeah, well, what's left of them?
Come on.
OK, what's left of them? But that is their mission.
Yeah, people have been critical that Kemi Badenoch hasn't made the start that people expected of her. But what I think she may be doing is let the bluster of the Reform Party move, let them make a few mistakes, and they have done. The row between Musk and Farage, which has been quelled over Tommy Robinson. And it might be that at some point, after that bluster and some of the fault lines begin to appear in Reform, because they're having a bit of a honeymoon period, then actually she might begin to make a comeback. She's a very, very formidable debater in Parliament. The way she...
Does anyone notice?
Well,
William Hague was pretty good.
Well, that's a very good point. Does she have the charisma? She has the intellect.
I don't think she's got the
charisma?
presence at the moment.
Right.
And that's a tough thing to get. But
Against
time will
Farage,
tell.
time will tell.
Margaret Thatcher was really unpopular for 6-7 months before she started to make inroads.
Yes.
In fact, longer. So any
well, there's nout as queer as folk, if I can even use that term unwokingly now. So I think, Reform, I think we had to have something like that in order to shift and engage politics at a very young age, and then, closer to home.
No insurgent, we've only got a minute, by the way, but no insurgent party in my lifetime, I'm 65, nearly 66, has ever got to 22-23% in the polls. They are different.
No, they are.
And these local elections coming up in May...
Was there not a little bit of SDP excitement in 1983?
There was excitement.
Yes.
There was, and it was just when my first vote nearly went to the SDP because I thought they were new, and then I grew up.
Right.
Well, no,
But they're a very different party now, minority though they are, the SDP.
I quite like the SDP. I really do.
They're still going.
They are still going.
Yeah.
William
But they're a
Clouston's
very Clouston's SDP is very different to Dr. David Owen. Very different.
Yeah.
Because it was SDLP then, I think.
They have an interesting take on Europe as well. We're talking about the SDP. I'll have them in as guests if we carry on like this.
They'd be delighted.
Have you got anything planned for the rest of the weekend? Having given up your Sunday to be here?
It's my wife's birthday tomorrow, so I've given her the Trump administration as a present.
Happy birthday, Mrs.
Birthday, love.
You're going to have to shout if all the music's coming. Claire, what are you up to?
I've got more work and more everything else to do, more family stuff.
I'm off to the rugby
Lovely.
later this afternoon, off to Saracens. It's going to be freezing, but my grandkids are coming with me.
Oh, lovely.
And it sounds like it's not the end of the show. It is the end of the show for you two, though, because I'll be coming back at the top of the hour. I'll be joined by Theo Usherwood as we go through the key political stories, and you can join the conversation.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Coming up in the next hour, I'll be joined by Ashley Bakshi. She is the cousin of Agam Berger, who is hopefully going to be released either today or within the next 42 hours as one of the long-suffering hostages held by Hamas. And Roy Lilly, later on in the hour, we'll be talking about the NHS and the corridors, and I'll be sharing some of the points that you have made to me during the conversation as you've been sharing your experiences with me. Thank you for your messages, which have all disappeared from my screen. I'm sure someone will solve that one out for me. 0344 499 1000. But now I'm going to be joined by Theo Usherwood because tensions are rising ahead of Donald Trump's inauguration. As we know, the former president and next soon-to-be president is threatening to publicly embarrass Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, claiming he has some damaging information about the Labour leader could be revealed soon. I kind of think that's all very tongue-in-cheek. Starmer's supporters say the threat is an attempt to undermine his political standing. I mean, honestly, it's like a bit of a circus what's going on there. But more interestingly, I think, is the idea and the threats going around that maybe the new president will, so if you like, put the block on Peter Mandelson becoming ambassador. As we'll be talking to Theo about that and other things, including Sadiq Khan, who has warned that Western democracy is under threat from a resurgent fascism ahead of Donald Trump's impending inauguration. Timing is everything, Sadiq. Why don't you just say it as it is instead of caveating it? I think he's basically aligning Donald Trump as a fascist there. That's how I read it. Speaking ahead of the event, the London mayor stated a rising global challenge to democratic values, urging stronger resistance to authoritarian movements. And he's saying that when, I think it's fair to say, Donald Trump won a convincing democratic mandate across every level. As I say, joining me now, it's Theo Usherwood, political commentator. Welcome, Theo. Thanks for joining us on a Sunday.
Great to be on your show. Thank you for inviting me, Nick.
I can see you are parked up very safely there. I'm most impressed. Look, let's just rattle through some of the key stories today, if we can. These threats to embarrass Keir Starmer moments after inauguration. I mean, this sounds like a bit of hype to me, but there is residual tension with some of his advisers about how Labour behaved during the election campaign. They didn't like sending over 100 helpers and all that stuff, isn't there?
Yes, there is residual tension. I think you're quite right to raise that. I think the other interesting point that we've spoken about, you just mentioned there, of course, is whether Donald Trump steps in and blocks Lord Mandelson as Keir Starmer's pick to be UK ambassador to Washington. And I think if he decides to block that, that would be seen as and it would be very rare for a president to step in like that and do it. So I think that would be a significant move if that was to happen. So in terms of the threats, I think that's, as you rightly point out, Nick, I think that's the big one.
We were reminded by Johnny Gould, and I've no reason to doubt him, but he was talking about in Trump's first term, he had problems with Kim Darroch and effectively removed him as ambassador. Can you recall that? I'm just sprung that on you, but that.
Yeah, I think there was clearly Lord Darroch was. I think it was seen when he was in post and during the first term. There was clearly it was not a straightforward relationship, and I think that was problematic. Karen Pierce, incidentally, who was the ambassador, was the outgoing ambassador, I should say, had worked very hard to build strong relations with the Trump team. Phone calls where Keir Starmer got to speak to Donald Trump are widely thought to be a credit to her relationship with the Trump team. Bringing in somebody like Lord Mandelson, who has a very different world view in terms of how he sees the UK, how he sees UK relations with the rest of the world compared to, the United States and that sort of protectionist view from Donald Trump, is a gamble. Now, Lord Mandelson is extremely adept at building relationships. He's already spoken about the possibility of trying to build relationships with the Trump team. He doesn't have any scruples. He's not squeamish about potentially using Nigel Farage as a go-between. But at the same time, there is and you pointed to this in your intro there, that when Labour allowed activists to go out and volunteer for the Democrats, there was a complaint, a significant complaint from the Republicans. That didn't help matters. Nigel Farage, as the Reform UK leader, obviously has the ear of Donald Trump and those within Donald Trump's circle, even though he's had a bit of a falling out with Elon Musk. And that's not going to help matters either. And at the same time, and I think this is significant, Donald Trump has a suspicion of supranational bodies like the European Union, like NATO. And that's the way that Keir Starmer has been very clear that he wants to face in the next 4 years. He's already spoken about Donald Tusk, has said, he'd like to see a return, closer relationship with the UK, and he's the president of Poland, former, senior member of the European
Council
Union, European Council. That's right. And at the same time, Keir Starmer has said that he wants to announce a reset with the European Union. That's going to go down badly with Trump.
Do you think, briefly before we move on, do you think we'll find out quickly what the relationship with London is going to be like under the Trump administration?
I think we already know it's going to be difficult. And the question is now whether that sort of it becomes openly fractured, and does the relationship that we've seen with the interventions of Elon Musk and his attacks on Keir Starmer and the UK, are those allowed to continue, or does Donald Trump, and this is something that he's very adept at, try to rise above it and play people off against each other, and actually try to be the mediator who comes in over the top and says, well, okay, I'll work with London, but I'll work with London on this basis. And I think what is clear now is that people in the Foreign Office and in Number 10 are waking up to the idea that it's not business as usual. It was significant, at the beginning of last week, they were going to push through the Chagos Islands deal. It was all going to go ahead. People were working ferociously to get that over the line. And then suddenly at the 11th hour, somebody said, actually, hang on a moment, this is going to go down so badly with Donald Trump. It's going to go down so badly with the incoming Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. We need to give them the right of actually vetoing this deal.
The only thing that's worrying about that is it's taken so long for people in Westminster and perhaps the Foreign Office to work that one out. Now, something that he is going to do quickly by all accounts, which I'm sure will set the pulse beating for quite a lot of people in this country who are worried about immigration, illegal migrants particularly, is that according to Trump's new border czar, a chap called Tom Homan, raids to detain and deport migrants living in the US without permission are set to begin on the first full day, that's Tuesday, of Donald Trump's new administration. He'll probably do that, won't he?
Yes, I think what's interesting about Trump this time around is he's learned all of the lessons from last time. He doesn't have any worries or concerns about trying to navigate the Washington landscape. He's, if you look at his picks for various key positions, he wants to get straight in there and get on with his agenda from that election win at the beginning of November. And I think you're right to say that, all the indications are that this is going to be Donald Trump. This is going to be the max version of Donald Trump, and he's going to plow ahead with his agenda. What he tapped into and what the Democrats didn't see coming during 2024 was he tapped into this real feeling that Washington wasn't working for America, and he knows that he wants to do right by the people who voted for him right across the United States. He wants to plow on with that agenda. He doesn't want to waste time trying to navigate around the political niceties within Washington, and that's why he's appointed Homan to that key post. And we can expect it. We can expect it to be bumpy. I think in the coming weeks, he's going to get on with it. He's not going to waste time.
Well, according to Sadiq Khan, he's busy warning Western democracy is at risk from resurgent fascism ahead of the Trump inauguration. timing's everything on here. He's clearly also got Donald Trump in his sights, as well as, I'm sure, as parties like the AfD in Germany and elsewhere. It's extraordinary, really, that he's made this intervention on one level, but in many senses, I think he's also been very consistent with what he's always said. What's Sadiq Khan's motivation here? Is he trying to push the Labour Party to be more vocal about the far right, as he would happily describe them?
Yeah. So I think you're right to raise. So there is votes for Labour in addition to Donald Trump, right? There is a caucus of people who are vehemently opposed to Donald Trump. And what Sadiq is doing is trying to appeal to those people. However, in that article that he's written for The Observer, it is toned down, and it is quite. He doesn't attack Donald Trump directly, as Labour politicians, including our Foreign Secretary and of course Sadiq Khan, Angela Rayner, have done in the past. This is not a two-footed challenge on the incoming president. It talks in terms, we all know who he's talking about, of course. He's talking in terms about, the rise of fascism and the inferences, of course, that Donald Trump is key to that from Sadiq Khan's point of view. But this is Sadiq Khan not putting his foot to the floor in this attack. It's measured. And what's also interesting is the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, has already been out this morning saying that he disagrees with Sadiq Khan and that he thinks that it is not the view of what expressed by Sadiq Khan in terms of the rise of fascism, is not the view of the British government. But at the same, I take your point. It's Labour trying to face both ways. Sadiq Khan, as the Mayor of London, a senior elected Labour politician, appealing to the core Labour vote, who do not like Donald Trump, who are opposed to Donald Trump, but the government at the same time taking a different approach, knowing that they have to do business with Donald Trump. It's quite subtle politics here from Labour, and it's a way of trying to face both ways. Whether Donald Trump sees through that, I suspect he will.
And can we expect some verbal battles, well, not verbal battles, social media battles between Khan and the real Donald Trump?
No, I think Sadiq Khan's going to be under fairly strict orders to pare it back. That won't be helpful. And I think, I think that the old days of banning blimps in London and all the rest of it, I think those are gone. And Sadiq Khan will be under, I'd imagine, quite strict orders. Whilst he'll have permission to write articles like this in The Observer, where he talks about the rise of fascism, but without naming anybody, I think that will be okay from Keir Starmer and David Lammy's point of view, but I don't think he'll be able to rise to the bait or indeed provide the bait for Donald Trump as has happened in the past. I think those days, that would be highly damaging. And the reason I say that is that it took sustained intervention from Elon Musk before Keir Starmer even clapped back and talked about, and hit back at Elon Musk and the spread of misinformation as the Labour leader saw it. They don't want to be seen as the ones who antagonise the relationship. It's a very delicate balance that they have to strike, and they don't want to infuriate the leader, because there are so many big decisions coming up in short order, like America's support for Ukraine, a deal with Vladimir Putin, everything that, we may have a ceasefire in the Middle East, but there's a huge amount that still has to be sorted out in that regard. So the relations are at a delicate point, and it will do nothing for the British
and I think it's probably fair to say,
and indeed voters.
I think it's fair to say we don't have a sure-footed government as yet, so the prospect of shall we say, foul-ups are pretty clear. Listen, let's move on to Nigel Farage. He's in America, as you will be aware. He's enjoying, he's attending many functions, many parties. Apparently, he's picked up an offer of a cheque of $10 million from someone to help fund and lead him to power. But he's also said very boldly at a reception, I think it was last night, I could be Prime Minister before Trump leaves office. Is that a real prospect, do you think?
It would need this government to fall, because, of course, the next American election is in 2028. Keir Starmer can run the UK government, his government, this parliament through till 2029. So it would need the government to fall. And in that respect, I'm not sure it is possible. Is it possible that Nigel Farage wins the next election? I think that is a perfectly plausible idea. We've seen the rise of Reform. It's gone from, if we think back to a year ago, it was sort of bumbling around on 8, 9, 10% in the polls. They're now up to above the Tories in some polls.
I just interrupt you on that. I'll just interrupt you on that point. In my far longer political life than yours, you'll be pleased to hear, no insurgent party has actually got anywhere near the heights of Reform. It's a hugely significant, that, isn't it?
It's huge. It is hugely significant, Nick. I still think that if you look at the way the polls are playing out at the moment, I still think, and you'll know this and you'll be in a much better place to talk about it than myself, but I still think there needs to be some accommodation with the Conservative Party. There needs to be a way that the two can come together. We know that Nigel Farage does not play well with others. He likes to be the leader. He likes to be the top, at the very top, and he doesn't negotiate. He doesn't work well potentially in a team unless he's leading that team. That's the way he likes to run things. And I think that's going to be difficult for the Conservative Party to accommodate. But for there to be guaranteed success for right of centre politics in 2029, and I say guaranteed success, there needs to be some sort of accommodation between Reform and the Conservative Party, and there needs to be a common ground.
Okay,
where
I'm going to give you a
together.
very simple chance to answer this one before we let you go back to your weekend. On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate the chances of an accommodation between the Conservatives and Reform by the time of the next general election?
I'd rate it at 7. And I think just watch out for what happens in Runcorn. There's going to be a by-election very soon.
Yeah.
Labour have a lead of over 14,000 from the general election over Reform. If the Tories and Reform go into that and fight it hard, Labour will retain the seat. I think that's probably odds on likely to happen. If they can work it out, I think Reform will win.
Wonderful. Lovely to hear from you. Theo Usherwood, political commentator, words of wisdom and very wise there indeed. What did you make of what he said? What are the chances of an accommodation between the Conservatives and Reform? Do you think that would be the sure way to ensure a Reform-dominated or partnership in government? Or do you think they should just carry on trying to obliterate the Conservatives and try and form a government of their own, which is still a very tall order? 0344 499 1000. Coming up, we will be talking about Israel and the settlement there. I'll be talking to Ashley Bakshi, who is the cousin of Agam Berger, with the upcoming impending release over the next 42 days of 33 hostages. All that and more with me here on Talk. Nick Bois sitting in for Peter Cardwell.
The government collects so much money from us on roads, for example. You know, the road tax keeps going up. You know, electric car drivers are now going to be paying road tax as well. I mean, 40 billion, I think, was the last estimate I was told, that is collected every single year. We've got places like Transport for London in London, where they collect hundreds of millions of pounds every year in ULEZ fines, in parking fines. You know, every single council in Britain is absolutely lording it up with millions and millions of pounds. And yet the roads get worse. Why don't they spend some of that money on the bleeding roads?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. We just have a statement in from the UK government on the latest in Israel and Gaza. The UK government has welcomed reports that British national Emily Damari is on the list of hostages to be released by Hamas today, a Foreign Office spokesman said, adding, "We stand ready to support her upon release." As I said, I was going to be talking to Ashley Bakshi, who is the cousin of Agam Berger, who is currently a hostage and is due to be released over the next 42 days. But unsurprisingly, in what must be a hugely significant day, we're probably going to speak to her a little bit later now. So I've brought things forward to talk about the NHS, and I'm very pleased to say my old partner, who used to be very kind, always give me his time on Talk TV, Roy Lilly, is joining me, of course, a former NHS Trust chairman. Not sure I'd ever want that job. Roy, welcome.
Nick, it's very nice to see you again. Good morning.
In fact, you're looking younger now. You've left that a while ago, you see.
It's the load off my shoulders.
Roy, look, I've got a slightly different take on these photos that have been exposed as such in the Mirror today, which show patients lying basically head to toe on trolleys, and they write quite accurately about how doctors are like, honestly, it's like this every day, we're in despair. And Dr. David Bull was saying earlier himself how he's got medical friends who just don't want to work anymore in these circumstances. They're just at the end of their tether. However, I think the only thing I would highlight on this revelation in the Mirror today is I'm not so shocked. I saw this at Harlow. I've seen it in other hospitals. I mean, it's pretty rampant, this, isn't it? Using our corridors as basically wards.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's not new, Nick. I mean, it's new in as much as it's really bad at the moment, because we've had the confluence of the four viruses doing the rounds: Norovirus, COVID, the flu, and RSV. So, I mean, it's kind of hit the NHS all at once. But every year there's a hiatus in the NHS, and people say to me, well, you know, don't the NHS know every winter, every year there's going to be a winter and blah, blah, blah. And you will know from your time at Harlow that the NHS starts planning its winter plans in the summer. I mean, this winter plan was in June. The difficulty they have is capacity. We just simply don't have the capacity in the system. The NHS works...
Roy, can I just clarify something I said earlier? I think we have one of the lowest beds per patient, population ratios in Europe, don't we?
Yes, you're absolutely right. We do. We have the lowest beds per head of population, doctors, nurses, professional scanners, all of that. And that was a product of the 10 years of flatline funding after the World Banking crisis. But we've got a situation now where we've never really recovered the capacity. Now, the NHS runs at about 93% of capacity almost all the year. The World Health Organization and the Royal College of Emergency Medicine reckon about 83% is the safe level that gives you time for what's called churn. That's the movement of patients through the system. So it's chock-a-block all year round. When you get these kind of hiatus, the difficulty is twofold. Firstly, it's the surge of people coming in. And secondly, hospitals only work if they can do what's called flow the system. So people come in the front door, get fixed up, go out the back door. It's like a conveyor belt. what is happening now is that right now, as we speak, there are about 1,400 people in hospital who do not need to be there. They are fundamentally elderly, frail people who've overcome their whatever it was they were admitted with, breathing difficulties, exacerbation of existing conditions. They'll be ready to go home, but the NHS is not allowed to discharge people if they're not convinced that they're discharging people safely. It's a legal duty of care.
So, sorry, can I just interrupt you, Roy, on that point, just to clarify something? You're talking about what usually comes under the umbrella of having social care available to look after people when they leave. Why then is it that you've got a government and NHS working on, I don't know, a 10-year plan? I lose track of how many plans there are. But we don't have a plan for social care. We've got to wait another 3 years for another damn review before we're doing anything. It doesn't make sense.
No, Nick, you're right. And we had the Dilnot report, which most people regard. Andrew Dilnot, Sir Andrew, as he is now, wrote a report on the future of social care back in 2011. Most people at the time, and still do, regard that as the seminal report. It has a lot of very carefully constructed recommendations with a certain amount of elasticity for governments to implement them, which was very sensible. And successive governments, going right back to Theresa May, haven't implemented the Dilnot report. Okay, why haven't they done that? And why has this government really kicked social care into the long grass? Louise Casey, Baroness Casey, is producing an interim report in a year and a full report in 3 years. And incidentally, it's the same Baroness Casey who's just been appointed by the Home Office.
I mean, she's good, but she's suddenly, very urgent to do social care, and it's going to take 3 years, despite how urgent it is. Oh, and by the way, we've just given you another job.
Which desk does she go to on Monday morning? I mean, it's nonsense. So I mean, what are the reasons? Why is it? Well, I don't think politicians have the courage to say, look, elder care is going to cost. Okay, it's going to cost either the individual or the taxpayer, all of us collectively. What do we do about that? The Dilnot report, I thought, was sensible in as much as it put a ceiling on the amount that the individual citizen would pay for their residential care. Put a ceiling on it. So let's just take a figure just to make an example. So if we say, okay, you will have to pay the first 80,000 quid of your care home costs, the first 80,000. After that, the government will step in whatever's required. Now, the average length of stay in a care home is under 5 years. And £80,000 is an insurable risk. So you could actually insure yourself against the risk of going into a care home earlier in life. Now, that seems to me to be sensible and would work. In fairness, this government has now got legislation going through Parliament to have a minimum wage for people working in the sector, and there are plans to try and turn it into a career rather than a job. But it is urgent, Nick. That's the point.
And that's only one end of this flow you talk about, from patients coming in, going out. So you've got, and I'm sorry, I apologise to those involved in this, if anyone is like, but you've effectively got a bed blocking situation, which causes a problem at the end. What about the flow going in? We had Claire Muldoon, one of our guests in the first hour here, who told me off for saying this is about how we fund it. And she was saying most of the problem is GPs, 111s, you name it, they all end up saying go to A&E. Is that fair?
Yes, they do. And 200,000 people last year, older people, were admitted to A&E from care homes. 200,000 from care homes, and you think care homes would have a higher level of competence and greater, and they don't, and it's a risk thing. Your granny's in a care home, she's not well, you've got people there who look after her with great care and love, but they're not medically or clinically qualified. Saturday she's not well, Sunday she's not well. The care home think, well, I'll ring 111, I can't ring the GP. The 111, risk averse, they say, ring 999, let's get her in. So all of that. And now we've got something called the capacity paradox, which is what managers are struggling with now. What that means is if you add capacity, you will fill it. The answer to the capacity paradox is to stop people getting sick in the first place. So we need to have a really big push on community care. GPs, you will know of your time when you were an MP and you would have engaged with your local GPs. They all have a frailty index. They know the people who are frail they're looking after. But we've got the index, we don't know anything about it because we haven't got the people.
So, okay, Roy, look, broadcasters love to do this, and it's not so simple. But if you had your wish list, what would your top 2 or 3 things be? Or have we really got to go back to a blank sheet of paper and start again?
No, I don't think we have, and that's the last thing we want to do. And I don't want to have social care set up as a national care service either, because that will set up another sort of, big silo. No, what I do, I try and fix social care. I'd sort out, whatever we're going to get out of the Deal Not report, and I bring it through urgently. And I would set up a community service, particularly for, primarily for elder care people. So that will be community nursing, GPs, and the elder care part of social care. I would move it in to the purview of the NHS so that it all worked together. And I would absolutely have a year-round focus on making sure vulnerable people are less vulnerable by the care we give them in their own home. It can be done. They did it in Denmark. Well, very good system.
Roy, if you get a chance, go to the Sunday Times. Very interesting article from their European Foreign Affairs editor. But he's talking about the French system, and we'll have a chat about that if I'm back here on Talk, or Peter's off sick for another day, because I think there's something to learn from that. I'll be very interested in your views.
I read it, and it's all about the money. They put 18% more in than we do.
Yeah, and interesting. That's a good start of the conversation. Thank you, Roy Lilly, former NHS Trust Chair there. Anything Roy said there, any of his suggestions make sense to you? Can you see some comfort in that, some future for the NHS? That social care problem, don't get me going, but it's huge. And the indignity older people are suffering when they're left in hospitals and can't get out because of failures that revolve around social care are horrific. But I could do 3 hours on that alone. What say you? 0344 499 1000. Coming up, Jonathan Slacker-Doherty, journalist and broadcaster, will be joining me to talk about the latest situation in Israel and Gaza. And then I'll be taking your calls. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you for your many messages. Thank you for your many calls. We've taken quite a few, and I'm going to do even more after I've spoken to Jonathan Sacerdoti, journalist and broadcaster, about the latest situation in Gaza as the ceasefire unfolds. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us. I do appreciate it. So are you able to just bring us up to date? Because it's been a bit of a moving picture this morning with obviously the delays and now the announcements of who's been released and so forth. Can you give us a sense of what's happening and when releases will happen?
There's been a lot of comings and goings overnight, and of course what was meant to happen was that Hamas were meant to release a list of the hostages who would be freed today, 24 hours ahead of time, and on this first very simple hurdle they failed to do that. So that caused Benjamin Netanyahu to declare that the requirements for the ceasefire hadn't been met and therefore it wouldn't go ahead. And there was indeed a strike in Gaza after that, after which they did miraculously come forward with those three names, which included Emily Damari, who many will know as the British-Israeli dual citizen whose mother has been campaigning over recent months here in the UK with the government here, with Keir Starmer and David Lammy, to try to get pressure from Britain to have her released. So she will be delighted if her daughter is indeed returned later today, and that should go into action around 4:30 Israel time. That's 2:30 UK time. That's when the actual transfer should be taking place. But we can probably expect more spanners in the works, because Hamas is, of course, a ruthless and unethical terror organization, which has shown in the past with such release deals that they will do everything they can to manipulate both the lists, the timelines, and indeed public opinion and sentiment in all of its actions. But so far, that's what will be happening. And many, of course, are trying to figure out who are the winners and who are the losers. I think that the sad reality here is that everybody loses who is in any way civilized, because when you negotiate with terrorists and when you have to make arrangements and deals with terrorists, you can expect them to break them and to act dishonestly as terrorists will. And indeed, it just strengthens those sorts of actors in the future.
Jonathan, I'm tempted to go in two directions here, so I'm just going to quickly ask you on one from the human side of things. What will actually happen with the released terrorists today? Will they be brought out in a car, walk through a gate and taken to a hospital? Do you have any sense of what will happen to them?
So in past arrangements like this, for example, the one that happened in the earlier stages of this war, the terrorist prisoners, who many, by the way, have been responsible for countless deaths. They've been the masterminds, yes, or the people that carried out brutal acts of terrorism costing many lives in Israel. Those people have been put into buses and taken for release. In this case, it's been agreed that they won't be released into Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, as some will call it. They will be released either abroad or into Gaza. And that is because there is, by the way, over 80% chance that they will recommit terror activities. In previous, judging from those who were released in previous deals, over 80% go on to carry out further terrorist activities, including, of course, Yahya Sinwar, who is now dead, killed during this war, but he was the leader and terrorist mastermind behind the 7th of October attacks. He was released in the Gilad Shalit deal, where Israel released 1,027 Palestinian terrorist prisoners in return for one Israeli soldier. So that's why there is so much of a dilemma over whether or not this is the right sort of deal to make with terrorists. Everybody knows exactly that this will cost lives.
And it's a political headache as well for the cabinet, of course, because there's some in the cabinet who just think there should be no deal until Hamas is eradicated, as was the ambition of Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. But just finally, I understand, and we've talked extensively about the future risk to security. Just going back to what will happen to the hostages that have been kept by Hamas when they arrive, hopefully later today. Is there any sense of what will happen to them when they'll meet with loved ones, or will they be whisked away to hospitals? Have you any sense of that?
Yes, well, again, judging from what happened before and also details that the Israelis have revealed now, they released some pictures yesterday evening of the area they've prepared for hostages. They're sort of covering all bases. Remember, they've had very little contact with any of these people. They don't know what condition many of them are in. Psychologically, physically, emotionally, they will be deeply scarred, probably for life. They've prepared giant hangars, and within them there are sort of almost like outside areas, but obviously they're inside with like a garden area, caravans for individual privacy, suites for counselling, for medical care. Some will need to go into hospital, perhaps. Some will need to some other forms of intervention. They will be reunited with their families as soon as possible, judging by previous releases of hostages, because obviously that's vitally important. But I think they're trying to cover their bases for all needs. And above all else, they've asked the media to give them space and try to let them and their families take the time that they need in order to just start that impossible task of readjusting to life out of the captivity of these brutal terrorists.
Jonathan Sakadoity, thank you so much for joining us, giving us a little insight into what is going to happen. Is what is going to be a very traumatic day for many people, particularly those hostages who have apparently not seen even natural light in their 350 days and more than that, 450 days of captivity. Coming up after the break, we're going to be taking your calls, and actually we've got a voice note, haven't we? Let's play a voice note now.
Morning, Nick. Anna, sorry. Lovely to see you back. I'm in the unusual situation of being born in Northern Ireland, and the other side of my family are Holocaust survivors. I appreciate Johnny's choosing his words carefully, but there can be no peace with these people. If you try to make peace with terrorists, they will just come back and do it all over again. Look at the behaviour of the people in this country yesterday. Savages marching through London. I don't think anyone can live in peace with these people. They have to go.
That's Anna, and you too can send voice messages 0344 499 1000. I think they're effective, a very effective communication device, and Anna, I think you typified how very best to use it with your very powerful message. Join the conversation, join me, 0344 499 1000.
Manchester United legend Dennis Law has died aged 84. He was nicknamed the Lawman. He became one of Old Trafford's most loved players after joining in 1962, very sadly battling dementia.
Yeah, and another one of these former footballers who's gone with this horrible, horrible disease back in the day when footballs weren't these synthetically made, wonderfully designed things that footballers have nowadays. When they used to be big old sacks of leather with, you know, God knows how many pounds of air in, and they used to be practicing heading with them.
As far as I'm aware, the well was poisoned in many respects in the negotiations that Theresa May did. I think she set up hurdles, or her team set up hurdles, which then made it very difficult for the United Kingdom to get what it wanted. The passport checks being perhaps one of them, but the most notable one, of course, was taking the bended knee to the notion conceding that point that gave the EU the upper hand in negotiations over Northern Ireland and therefore the entire United Kingdom.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Nick Bois, sitting in for Peter Cardwell. I just want to say momentarily, before we go to a couple of voice notes, then I'll be taking a call from Jackie and hopefully Larry as well. I just want to say how wonderful it's been to be back, but not least because of the huge level of engagement. I mean, you are fantastic. You've got ideas, you've got thoughts. Occasionally there's the little rant, and it's always such a pleasure to listen and learn to you all. Thanks for that. Let's. The NHS has been dominating a lot of the conversation today. Let's hear first from Jason.
Morning, Nick. Jason from Whitby. You can't import another 15 million people, not upgrade the infrastructure, and not expect to have problems. Problem solved. Cheers.
In fairness to Jason, we haven't even talked about the surge in immigration that has led to huge demands on the NHS as well. And I haven't done that for any particular reason, because we've been talking more about the structures around the NHS. But it has been a huge demand on the NHS that I think is too easily dismissed. And of course, the left won't really talk about it. Mark, on the same subject.
Morning, Nick. It's Mark in Lancashire. The thing I'd like to say is that the problem with the NHS is exactly the same as our bloated social security system, sick benefits system, and everything else, is that it's so generous and so easy to take advantage of that the whole world is coming here to use it. We're treating the whole world, and we're far softer and far more generous than any other country. And in all these countries, you have to work first and pay into the system before you get to take anything out. Here you don't. People just float in, walk into the NHS, get treated for free. This doesn't happen anywhere else.
It's certainly not meant to be an international health service, as Mark is effectively describing there. I would also say, and I mentioned this yesterday, it's pretty weird, isn't it, when, for example, Americans who tell me this, who've been unfortunate enough to have to go to casualty or the hospitals, actually they turn up and they want to pay, and the NHS eventually might send them a bill, but the chances of it happening are incredibly slim. And then there's, by the way, not just international people, there's also people who come to this country to use the NHS, so-called health tourism, but there's actually a lot of people in this country who also just have no understanding or, I think, respect for the system. How is it we're issuing millions of prescriptions for paracetamol? And a prescription, every time you use a prescription, £1 goes to the chemist, then there's the cost of the drugs. I mean, it's ludicrous, isn't it? And don't forget, before you say, oh yeah, but we pay for prescriptions, no, 95% or 93% of people do not pay for prescriptions. Jackie in Oldham. Hello, Jackie, a voice of common sense. How are you?
I'm very well, Nick, and it's lovely to have you back on our screen.
Thank you. And when are you running for Parliament? I keep telling you you should.
Well, I might be standing as a councillor in the local
Excellent.
Election.
Oh, let us know how you get on.
Yes, I will. The NHS.
Yes, you were a nurse, weren't you?
Yeah, and I worked my way up to be a senior manager, and I've also been a patient on the corridor, which is horrendous. I totally agree with what you said about looking at other systems. Now, I did some work with Reform, looking at other healthcare systems, and when they were formulating their health policy, about which systems work best. And in my opinion, it is the Dutch system. And the reason I say that is because it goes back to how we used to do healthcare in this country. It wasn't centralised. It was localised, where you would have your local general hospitals, which we've still got, and where you would have a strategic health authority for that region, which would oversee them hospitals, make sure they were performing, etc., etc. and it worked. And then we went mad and we started amalgamating all these hospitals, centralising the system. Now, the Dutch system, it's free at the point of care for those that need it, but you also have the availability of doing an insurance system, and the private and the public sector compete against each other. And for you pay for your add-ons, like you would have increased healthcare for like physiotherapy, the tertiary add-ons that you get. But to say that we can still stick with this system, I disagree with Roy Lilly. It's a sticking plaster. It has got to be dismantled, and we've got to do...
Jackie, really interesting, because I have, and I know you've been very good, you've listened to a lot of my shows in the past. I've always been an advocate of the Holland one, because the Dutch one, because I also lived there for a while. And what I found really fascinating about the whole process was they have social insurance as well, which means if you can't afford it, you basically get it provided for by the government. But the employer is also mandated to pay an insurance, of which, you know, it does come from your pay packet and things like that. But it's regulated. So the insurance companies, the older you get, they can't just whack up the costs of the premium to the point where you don't want insurance. It's very well regulated, and yet it operates in this free market. It's a cracking system. And I'm really pleased you raised it, because I feel like I'm the ambassador for Holland. I keep talking about it. So thank you for that. Jackie, for time reasons only, lovely to talk to you. Really hope you stand in May. Good luck with that. I probably shouldn't say that, because I've got suspicion you might be standing for a party that I've not quite yet joined. Larry, hello, in Merseyside.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm not so bad. My observations come from, I used to be a radiographer in the 70s in a large general hospital where we had the old-fashioned sister, staff nurse, etc.
Yes.
Now, the nurses in the wards I've been observing recently have all had degrees, but they have no idea how to nurse patients.
Larry, can I just check with you? Did you say they've all now got degrees, but their sort of patient interaction is just not so good?
Oh, useless.
Yeah.
There'll be an 8-bedded ward with an area at the top where the nurses congregate. But they congregate so obviously, chatting and knitting, and it doesn't seem as though, I don't know, they've got all the nurses on the ward with degrees. They're very clever.
Well, am I right? I'm pretty sure I am, but I will sense check, because you're the expert. It was in about 1998 that the Royal College of Nursing said our nursing needs to be raised up the ladder as a profession, and we want degrees. It was actually the Royal College of Nursing that pushed for degrees, and people spent more time in the classroom than on the ward rooms.
They did in training. On the ward, I know of a man who has got terminal cancer, and he was in hospital about 5 weeks. And during that 5 weeks, because he said, I don't want to get washed, he was never cleaned.
Oh.
Basic nursing would have just done it.
Look,
I know patients have got rights. But
you can't. I mean, hygiene on wards, it's just a no-brainer, isn't it? I want to ask you something, if I may, and I'm going to choose my words carefully here, but nursing assistants, sometimes I don't quite understand it, but first of all, when I'm on a ward, and I've been on quite a few wards, both as a visitor and as a patient, I'm not even sure who the nurse is. It's not clear to me who the staff nurse is. It's not clear to me who's a nursing assistant. And it's only when I ask them things or get into conversations do I actually realise I'm probably talking to someone who is relatively unqualified, or certainly not qualified to a sufficient level to answer questions. Is the nursing assistant being asked to do things that perhaps the qualified nurses should only be doing these days?
Well, there are a lot of care workers on the wards. You can't tell who they are because they all wear pyjamas. of those strips.
So what's a care worker on a ward doing? Are they just helping people be fed and things like that?
Well, they don't do that because the number of dishes and plates of food that you see just plonked at the end of a patient's bed.
Yes, that's my point.
Even though they can't do it themselves, so they plonk the food, delivered it, that's where it ends.
Yeah, but that's my point. I've been there where I've actually turned up and started to turn up at meal times because I was never confident that a patient who would have dementia, so, you know, which means it's actually you just forget how to eat at times, would actually get fed. And I deliberately turned up there because I wasn't convinced they were getting fed.
You are so right.
That's a shocking state of affairs, isn't it? Listen, thank you for sharing your experience. I think, and Jackie before, when you've got the expertise of having done the job and been there, and I don't care how long ago it is, I think that brings a little bit extra insight. But so too does being a patient. 0344 499 1000. We've got another hour to go where you can share with me your thoughts and solutions, particularly on the NHS. Coming up, Steve Gill, a former advisor to President Clinton and the Bush administrations. We'll be talking about the upcoming inauguration. I'm still going to explore with him also some of the suggestions that Peter Mandelson may not be approved as ambassador. Blimey, that would be quite a turn-up for the books if that actually happened, wouldn't it? I'd be quite amazed if it did happen. Who knows? What are your thoughts about that? And by the way, are you looking forward to Donald Trump?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And welcome back. I'm Nick Bois, sitting in for Peter Cardwell. By the way, I haven't gone on enough about this. Peter Cardwell was asked to become ambassador to Washington by some of our listeners. Do you think that's a good idea? I think it's a great idea. So we can pack him off to Washington and I'll sit in here and talk to you a bit more. Or maybe you prefer him back in the hot seat here, which I'm sure he will be next weekend. But what do you make of the thought of Peter Cardwell as ambassador to Washington? Yeah, interesting. Right, a few messages before we go to our next subject. Nick, on the subject of the NHS, my wife is a nurse with 111. That's the service that you call into when you are seeking advice rather than going off to, if you can, see a GP or going to the hospital. Her hands are tied by protocol for sure, but the general public have developed a mentality that they must go to A&E and they will be seen and treated even though they don't need to be there at all. This mindset is fueling the crisis and stopping the really sick and injured getting the urgent attention they need. All the best, Bertie from Cheshire. One does think, hey, this is a radical thought, top of my head, hey, maybe if you introduced a £10 charge, maybe people might think, do I really need to go? And I'm sure lots of people would say, but that'll put people off going when they need to. Nick, given the already fractious relationship that Starmer has with Trump, wouldn't you think that he'd try and put that odious little man Khan in his place? That's the mayor of London he's referring to. I really think this shows weakness on his part and further damages the UK-US relationship. And a final one from Dave T. Let's get this right. The Chagos Islands debacle, the appointment of Mandelson, the dispatching of Labour activists to support Harris, sucking up to China and the EU are all attempts by Starmer to embarrass President Trump, so he should expect retribution in short order. He only has himself to blame, says Dave in Bristol. Starmer and his disciples, like Khan, are incompetent, short-sighted, deaf, etc., 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 and they are incapable of supporting our country, our values and our way of life, says Dave in Bristol. Well, speaking of Trump, I'm very pleased to say we've got my next guest, Steve Gill, former advisor to President Clinton and the Bush administrations, joining me now. Hello.
Hey, Nick, how are you?
I'm great. It's a big day, isn't it? I mean, you've got tomorrow, the inauguration. Do you still, even though you are probably not as long in the tooth as me, do you get kind of excited around these days?
You know, I've been to several inaugurations, and they're always exciting, regardless of which team is taking over. I'm a little more excited because I'm more of a Trumper than a Biden guy, but it's interesting. People have said it would be a cold day in hell when Trump would get back in the White House. And the weather in Washington, D.C. seems to be complying with that adage.
Yes, but I don't think we'll extend that analogy because it would imply that Washington was hell. Well, maybe it is. Yeah, there you go. Listen, just want to talk around it. By the way, are you going tomorrow? Will you be there tomorrow?
Yes.
Oh, great.
They've moved most of the events inside at this point because of weather and because of security concerns. So it's going to be a little different than your typical
I
outside.
think I'd be, if I was President Trump, I'd be disappointed about that. I think he's coming to this term with a lot more experience, a lot sharper. I didn't particularly like his inauguration speech 4 years ago. I thought it was clumsy and parochial, and actually I think it reflected a lot of inexperience. I'm kind of expecting a real Trump agenda to be talked about, but maybe with a hint of, you know, how can we say, a nod and a wink to the international leadership role America does play. Who knows?
You know, it's been interesting. We have seen already, Nick, a Trump 2.0, both in his recognition, as I've said before, that personnel is policy. The people he's putting in his cabinet will be people that will pursue his policies rather than 8 years ago where he had people that necessarily weren't his people and that were straying from his agenda. I think he's learned that, and I think that as we've seen in his speeches in the last several months, he has taken a more restrained approach, even though he is pursuing his policies aggressively. And as you were mentioning, it's going to be interesting to see how he reacts with international leaders. Many of them have been coming, you know, to the fold, whether it's President Meloni in Italy or in Hungary or in Argentina. But there is friction with some, and I think those who are smart will recognize Trump really likes to play the personal game. And if he has a good personal relationship with a leader, it'll go well. If he doesn't, things could go awry.
Well, the general sense here, I think, is that the relationship between Prime Minister Starmer and Trump is not one that is going to be easy to form any bond, and I think a lot of us are very concerned about that. But let's just talk a little bit about the theatrics, because my understanding is once a president's been inaugurated, he has a list of international phone calls of leaders to call. Now, there's always a little bit of ego involved in this, and you've got France competing with Britain, and who will President Trump call first? I mean, how high on the list or low on the list do you think Starmer will be?
Well, he's already talked to President Xi. I mean, there are expectations that he will meet with President Putin of Russia in the near future. But you're right, that phone list will be interesting to watch. Yeah, I know there are many in England that are concerned that the relationship with the U.S., particularly as you recounted earlier, with Labour sending people to campaign against President Trump, with the Mendelsohn appointment as prospective representative of England to the Trump administration. There's a lot of things that are being done by Starmer and frankly, by Mayor Khan that are just, throwing fuel on the fire of bad relations. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Now, the good news, Nick, is that at least he's not talking about making England a state like Canada or acquiring Greenland. So we're not at that stage at this point. Although some in London,
I've got to tell you, there'll be quite a few who would like to be the 51st state. But I wouldn't necessarily put my marker on that, but I can see it. But look, I mean, it's interesting that we're getting stories over here that the advisors to Donald Trump are kind of saying, it wouldn't be a bad idea to give a bit of a slap on the wrist to the Labour government and Keir Starmer for the reasons we've talked about, that Starmer is very much pursuing a foreign policy agenda that is not necessarily in line with what President Trump would want over China, for example. President Starmer wants to be really close to the President Starmer, did I say that? Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, wants to closer relations with the EU, an institution President Trump doesn't have much love for, understandably. But also for some of those things that took place, including the campaigning, which, whilst it may go on, the fact is, if you want to provoke a Donald Trump team, send over 100 people to help have him defeated. And the talk is that he would block Peter Mandelson as ambassador. I mean, is that just some newspaper hype, or do you think that is a possibility?
It's always tough to tell with President Trump. He will lay things out or have things put forward that are part of the negotiation. And maybe this is a way to push Starmer into saying, maybe we can pick somebody else. I've heard that the current ambassador of the U.S. has had a hard time securing tickets to some of the events here in Washington. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was some pushback against Mendelsohn. It was interesting. I was out, following some of the protest rallies yesterday against Trump, where they were, celebrating socialism and communism and doing their chants of, fascism has to go, which is interesting because it's the same language that Sadiq Khan is using towards Trump. So the anti-Trump protesters on the streets shouting, that Trump is a fascist is being repeated or maybe encouraged by Sadiq Khan. These are not going to help the relationships. The good news is that Trump has very close relations with Nigel Farage and the reform movement. They seem to be on the rise, and we'll see if that's going to be the path for better relations with England.
Well, let's talk about Sadiq Khan, because in the past, I think he did some things that were very damaging just to satisfy his own ego and his own audience, which I didn't think befitted the role of a mayor of one of the biggest cities and most important cities in the world, when he was like blowing up rather offensive sort of character images of Trump and so forth. His language was very blunt. He's told us, believe it or not, in this recent attack by him, where he's warning that Western democracy is under threat from a resurgent fascism. He's not naming names, but timing's everything. He clearly is aligning Donald Trump with fascism, and he's probably referring to people like Giorgia Meloni, and he's probably even talking about the potential rise of the AfD in Germany. But he's toned it down a little bit. How much does Sadiq Khan matter when it comes to the relationship with Britain, do you think, in reality?
I don't think it matters a lot. I think that you look at the Labour government and the problems that they're having, both in terms of trying to cancel elections and block investigations. You have, I think, one of the police chiefs in England saying that if Americans comment disparagingly about England politics, that they will extradite us and bring us to jail in England. It's like, since about 1776, we really haven't cared much about what some of your officials have to say. So if he wants to come try to get us for our commentary about British politics, bring it on, big boy. As long as you don't try to burn our capital again, we'll be fine. I think the bottom line is that relations between the English people and Americans are great. But as we see all over the world, governments don't get along very well. People tend to. So I think it's still a great relationship between the U.S. and the British people. Politicians are making it hard. And I was doing commentary the other day, Nick, for another international station, and pointed out that MAGA, Make America Great Again, is not just something American. As you mentioned, Prime Minister Meloni in Italy, Argentina, Hungary, the problems that the ADA is having in Germany. This populist rise that are really Trump policies are breaking out all over the world. And you're seeing it also in England as well, where the illegal immigration issue was one of the forefronts of Trump's reelection. It's an issue there as well. So many of the same policies are making MAGA sort of a worldwide issue. And I think you're seeing that play a bit in England as well.
You're absolutely right. And I, if we have time, I want to finish on an immigration thing. But when, particularly over here, when people talk about President, you can call him President Trump because he was president, can't you? I always try and follow form. But yeah, when President Trump actually talks about his ambition for America, his attacking the bureaucracy, dissecting the bureaucracy, the government bureaucracy particularly, when he talks about the entrepreneurial spirit, the actual opportunities in the technological age, embracing, by the way, technological giants who in the past have been quite happy to trash him, but he's big enough to see what they mean to a future America. This liberal, shall we say, this opening up, this economic positive approach, this whole new vibe of making it a great place to be, to live, to work and invest. That is something I think we need to hear more about, what Trump is doing. This is a really positive agenda. I wish we had it over here.
Well, I think that's what you're seeing in countries, like Italy, Hungary, Germany, France is throwing their government out. Canada is throwing their government out. You're seeing it literally all over the world. And it is the same sort of populist, let's create prosperity.
Not here.
Agenda.
We've just elected a government that doesn't stand for that.
Well, because I think to some extent the British voters were pitching a tantrum because the Tories didn't do what they promised to do, particularly on illegal immigration. So it's like, well, fine, if we're going to have somebody that's embracing illegals, let's go ahead and go all in with reform because they're saying they're going to do it. I think there's some buyer's remorse now. And I think we're going to continue to see that shift back. It's just a matter of how soon voters get a chance to express their voices at the ballot box.
Yeah. Listen, just on immigration, one of the reports coming out is that his Tsar on immigration is going to start basically arresting illegal migrants on day one, i.e. Tuesday, the first full day of the presidency. Do you think that will happen?
Absolutely. I think Tom Homan has made it clear that they are not just focused on places like Chicago or New York City, that there are going to be offices all over the country where they're going to be going after the criminal illegal migrants. Now, we're talking about the people who have committed violent crimes here in the U.S., have committed violent crimes where they came from and are now in the U.S. They're not targeting somebody that's, working and paying their taxes, even if they're here illegally. They're going after the criminal illegal migrants, and frankly, nobody's really in opposition to that.
And what will happen to them? Because here, believe it or not, we've even arrested some foreign criminals, some of them illegal, some of them who were here on a sort of pathway to citizenship. We've got 10,000 of them and we put them all in jail, but we can't get rid of them. They're still here. We've been blocked by the various things, including the European Court of Human Rights, from sending them back to wherever they came from. What are you going to do with them?
Well, I think you've already seen some of the countries saying, yeah, we'll take them back because Trump is going to control the checkbook. And I think that's if you're a country that wants to continue to get U.S. aid, foreign aid, or good trade relations, you're going to take your criminals back, put them back in your prisons, not have them hold in ours. And I think, again, Trump is going to use the checkbook very well, both in terms of tariffs, in terms of international foreign policy, and certainly in terms of forcing these criminals back where they came from.
Well, here's one message just to leave it with you from Ben in Plymouth. That's where you guys were founded from, by the way. Remember, the Mayflower went over there from Plymouth. So, you know, don't write us all off. Hi, Nick. My friends and I are ordering some MAGA hats, Make America Great Again hats, just to wind up the left. Even in England, the left gets nasty about Trump, so I'm going to play my part. There you go.
I'm waiting for Nigel and Reform to have mega hats, Make England Great Again hats appearing pretty quickly.
Well, apparently you guys are busy giving him, or the Trump advisors are busy giving him advice how to become the next prime minister. And he was saying only a couple of days ago, I think, in Washington, within 4 years, before President Trump leaves office, he will be Prime Minister. There you go. Or he could be Prime Minister. I'm sure we're in for a ride over the next four years. Steve Gill, former advisor to Clinton and Bush administrations. Great to talk to you. I'll just say it again, actually, because I was never that optimistic about what a Trump presidency could mean. Since his election, I think his focus on revitalising America and spelling out through some of the appointments how he's going to do it hold great promise. We shall see. 0344 499 1000 for your contribution. I'll get some more of your messages shortly. But guess what? From Trump to Elon Musk. Well, sort of. We're going to go out of space with me here, Nick Bois, after the break.
These are figures provided under Freedom of Information laws, shows that the proportion of offences, including child sexual offences, where no data on the ethnicity of convicted criminals that recorded has been trebled in the past 15 years. It's gone from 11.6% up to 28.7%. They are basically less likely to record the ethnicity of people convicted in those crimes. There is no other explanation, according to some people, than cultural sensitivity of police and other agencies.
I mean, if we look at the Rotherham scandal, it was the worst thing that's happened to this country in the last century. You know, there's been avoidance and finger-pointing about that, so...
But he was pushing her to say Pakistani grooming gangs, which is factually correct. She didn't do that. Now, maybe...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So, an investigation has been launched into Elon Musk's explosive not tweets, or whatever you call them now, X's, explosive Starship test flight that forced dozens of planes to divert on Thursday. The SpaceX rocket blew up in space over the Bahamas about 8 minutes after takeoff in Texas. I, in fact, followed a little bit of this actually on X when he was posting pictures. Blazing debris was sent miles across the sky over the Turks and Caicos, very nice holiday resort, but also a British overseas territory. But despite the failure, Elon Musk appeared to see the bright side, posting, "Success is uncertain, but entertainment is guaranteed." I think he was trying to make a sort of joke there, because some of the debris flying had different colours behind it, and they looked like fireworks, basically. Joining me to talk about this is astronomer and space expert Andy Lound. Hello.
Hello. How are you today?
I'm very good. I think I can confidently say, when I'm talking to people around politics, that I may not be an expert, but I can definitely maintain my level of knowledge. I have no knowledge about what we are about to talk about here. So what happened? And tell us why, if you like, there's an investigation.
Yeah, the Federal Aviation Authority are the organisation, the administrative body that cover all types of flying vehicles, civil aviation, passenger planes and so on, and rocketry. So they have to be licensed to fly rockets into space from American territory. The Civil Aviation Authority do that here for regulations here. And therefore, if something goes wrong, then you still have to have the regular air investigation plan. And of course, in this case, it's because the Elon Musk rocket, this top section, the Starship, exploded in space 8 minutes after liftoff, as you correctly said. So they have to investigate why it actually happened, what rectification needs to be put in place to allow them to fly again, to make sure the same incident doesn't happen again. And then they look at the general safety issues that happened over it, were the safety precautions put in place correctly, in case they have to upgrade their procedures. And it looks like that seemed to have worked quite well. Although there was a diversion of aircraft, that is actually within the plan anyway. If there is a problem, then we'll put this into operation to divert aircraft. So aircraft are fully aware that there could be a diversion if there's an issue going on. And of course, the rocket, the way it's arced out over the sea, if something does go wrong, the debris will fall harmlessly into the sea, not onto a landmass.
Is landmass ever under... by the way, thank you for that very clear explanation of why the investigation. But is landmass ever threatened, during a launch like this? Because it says it happened over, I think, the Turks and Caicos. I mean, is it a factor that some of that debris could land on the Turks and Caicos, for example?
You can never mitigate against some material aerodynamically being affected by winds once it re-enters the atmosphere, but because looking at the imagery we saw, a great deal of it would have burned up. Anyway, yes, launches are deliberately done over the oceans for that particular reason. They're launched either over the Pacific or over the Atlantic in order to mitigate that, so things don't fall over the landmass. Let's take another example of this. When Virgin attempted to launch their rocket, which launched from the underside of a 747 from Cornwall, it flew over the ocean in order to do the launch, so it didn't actually have a risk of hitting a landmass. So that's what you do. That's why launches are done in places like Florida and California, so they can actually angle them away from major population zones. And that's the safe thing to actually do. India, for instance, will launch theirs, and again, it'll arc over the Indian Ocean rather than a risk. But having said that, once it's arcing, it depends where it breaks up, and the higher it breaks up, the better, because then the components will actually burn up.
So, in your community of sort of space travel and rocket experts, is there speculation as to what happened here, or has Elon Musk and SpaceX been quite clear what they think happened already, or does it all have to stay hush hush?
No, it's a very open process, hence the FAA regulations have to be played. Musk has been very open, actually, with all the work. They have a staggering number of sensors on these spacecraft, on these rockets, far more, for instance, than during the Saturn V testing. And that's partly because the technology has changed. And they already have identified that in the aft compartment of the Starship, that's just the top section here, in the aft compartment, there was, in fact, a fuel leak and a propellant leak, which then ignited and caused a fire, which then, of course, led to an explosion.
I should say that what you're showing on screen, for those who are listening, you're actually pointing to a model of the vehicle, and you're pointing to the rear end of the rocket.
Rear end, aft end. So it's in the aft compartment. There seems to have been a fuel leak, which led to an explosion. That's quite interesting because, of course, this was the test flight of what they call Block 2, a new design of the top section, the Starship. And what's interesting in this, which I find, because if you trace the history of these things, fuel leaks like this are actually staggeringly common in new design rockets. It's the things that bedeviled the Americans and the Russians in the 1960s when they were testing rockets. And they're things you have to look at to find out why that fuel leak occurred. Because you obviously have the main booster, which is a huge thing that the Starship is attached to. And during liftoff, and as it's traveling for a while, there is a separation here, which this folds away. That could have caused, for instance, a vibration problem, which caused the fuel leak. Who knows? So that's what they have to investigate, is what caused the fuel leak more than anything else. But this is standard procedure. There's nothing really unusual about it.
So perhaps I should have started with this, but most people will probably just know rockets go up in space. It was probably enough to have that conversation. But what was this all about? What was Elon Musk and SpaceX trying to do here? Was it testing a future model for use by humans, or was it bunging satellites up in the sky or something?
This was going to do this was the cargo version, which was to launch satellites. We're going to launch what they call dummy satellites, into dummy Starlink satellites up to test the deployment of satellites from this. The whole Starship system is one of the most remarkable systems ever developed, to be quite honest, for space. The whole thing is reusable. The idea is the whole thing comes back in two parts.
Wow.
The top section, the Starship, will carry cargo, put cargo into space, or it'll carry fuel to refuel spacecraft, or in fact it will be able to carry
and it's unmanned?
This one is unmanned, particularly. Yes, the next there will be a generation further down the line which will carry passengers, carry up to 100 people. Think about that. 100 people would be potentially.
It's like EasyJet.
It's a staggering thing. I mean, if you're going to do a survey, for instance, of the moon or Mars, for instance, and people are talking about colonizing, but think about it from a scientific expedition. 100 people. That means you'll have engineers, biologists, scientists, atmospheric experts, geologists going on an expedition. Absolutely fantastic potential. And this was part of the test system. It's a long road test system. He understands engineering really well. He understands the nature of the game. No matter how much you can put on a computer and do simulations on a computer, at the end of the day, you've got to fly something or drive
Andy,
something.
just to pick up on that, the idea of 100 people going up there and so forth, is this all privately funded with a view to making money, or is it actually a contract with the government to develop this?
It's actually a bit of both, really. Yes, there are contracts to the government to launch government projects, or for private companies who wish to send their satellites up, or to send equipment up, or to send people up, even for various projects. He's also privately funding it because he personally is interested in exploration of space and putting people on Mars. But one of the other big things for all this is by exploring places like the moon specifically in the short term, Mars long term, and satellites and asteroids in the medium term, will be for mineral rights, obtaining rare earth metals and material like that. We've just had, for instance, the British government willing to continue the funding on the fusion project, nuclear fusion project. One material you would really like for nuclear fusion reactors once they get going will be an isotope called helium-3. That's not found on the Earth, that's only found in space, specifically we think in the regolith or the dust of the moon itself. So the nation that could go to the moon, for instance, and control the resources there would have a head start in everybody else.
I tell you what, just beware when you get up there, you'll find Just Stop Oil or someone protesting at the minerals you're about to take from the ground, I suspect. Listen, Andy, fascinating. Can I just say, you explained that in such a way that I didn't get lost at any point. So thank you very much indeed for taking us through that. That was Andy Lound, astronomer and space expert. I don't know about you, but when I saw we were doing this today, I was kind of, really? Am I not sure? I thought that was fascinating. Just think about it. We're thinking of Elon Musk in these terms these days as the politician and getting involved with all the fights. He developed the Tesla, which love or hate EV cars. There's no question. The Y, one of his models, is now one of the world's best-selling cars. So he obviously knows what he's doing. He's looking at the space and innovation and development. Wouldn't you want someone like that in your government? And what have they done over here? They don't even invite him to investment conferences. I'm The mind boggles, doesn't it? 0344 499 1000. Coming up, it's going to be your calls. And you can join the conversation on 0344 499 1000. Got lots of messages to go through. And I'll be doing that as well for my last half hour with you this weekend, because I'm pretty sure Peter Cardwell, unless he has been made ambassador to Washington, will almost certainly be back here next weekend.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
I promised you calls, I promised you voice messages. That is what we're going to do. You can still join the conversation, 0344 499 1000. Let's first hear from Judy on the NHS crisis.
Hello, it's Judy from Maltofts, West Yorkshire. Has anyone looked into what these people are turning up with at the A&E departments? Because I'm still in touch with some people that work in the hospital, because I was a nurse for over 40 years, and they're turning up with cat scratchers, constipation, sore throat, how long you had it a week, and all this, that and the other.
Yeah, and don't get me going, Judy, spot on. And it's really... this is where I say people should have a financial stake in the NHS, because actually, if you were told it's going to cost you 20 quid or 10 quid to go there, which is nothing, you might actually think, right, do I need to go there from a scratch? Now, I say nothing because I know immediately a lot of people are going to say, no, 10 quid is a lot of money. But actually, it's nothing in compared to the free treatment you're going to get if you are needed to be seen. But maybe it's a device for people to start to think, is that really necessary? Because nothing else is working. Let's talk to Steve in Leeds. Hello, Steve.
Afternoon, Nick. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for calling.
Yeah, just a quick couple of points on the NHS and why there's a problem. A lot of it goes back to the days when it was set up, because we still had this Victorian system called the professions. So working class people work 24 hours a day or a 7-day-a-week service. The professions work until 5 and go home, and on a weekend they don't work. So just to give you an example, local GPs, if they open 8 while 5, are open 23% of a working week. Hospitals, and I'm not on about people being looked after in hospital, actually for doing diagnostic tests and operations, they're open 11 hours a day. That's 40% of the working week. Yeah. Because the people who do those things, the doctors, the radiologists, they're in the professions. And just like judges and barristers, they won't do a 7-day-a-week service. Now, the problem is, Everything else is 7 days. The police is 7 days. Ambulances are 7 days. Patients are 7 day a week problem. And what happens is you get a bottleneck in hospitals when all these people come in. I went in for an appendix operation on a Friday because they don't do operations after 11 o'clock. Yeah. It was the following Monday before it got done. So it's a bottleneck of people waiting to be treated because the NHS isn't a 24-hour day service, either with GPs or with hospitals.
And I'd love to know if that is just purely money. And by the way, don't go on a Friday, particularly a bank holiday. You'll be there all weekend and you won't get anything done until Tuesday, and that's questionable. And yet we take that for granted, Steve. Why?
Well, the problem is when the NHS was set up, we didn't have a 24-hour day economy. Most people finished work at 5 and went home, less chance of you having an accident. Most people didn't work weekends, they worked a 5-day week. Shops were closed on a Sunday, half day on a Wednesday. We live in a 24-hour world, but the NHS, just like the train drivers, is working on Victorian time schedules.
Yeah, and it's a lost opportunity because everyone talks about capacity, but actually we've got the capacity in the hours. Obviously, there's an issue whether we've got the number of beds if people needed to be seen. That's a different thing altogether. Steve, you raised a fantastic point. Thank you. Very good. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. Now, if there's someone out there, and we've heard from Jackie earlier, and we've heard from others who've actually worked in the profession, I'd love for you to sense check that call. Is there some sense in what Steve is saying? I can imagine money would be an issue on this because you'd be actually increasing the number of people you needed to cover the hours. But if you want to get some control back, maybe that is part of the answer. I don't know. You tell me if you can sense check it. Got a thought on that? 0344 499 1000. Let's go to David in London. Hello, David.
Hi, Nick.
Hello. We're all over the country today. Very good to hear from you.
Thanks, Nick. Nick, Sadiq Khan's saying there's a rise of the far right. But to me, Nick, Sadiq Khan himself is far right. It's very oppressive being under him. He loves to take our freedoms away from us, and he clearly enjoys seeing us suffer because that's what his policies do.
Well, I think what you're trying to say to me in a roundabout way is that whether it's far right or far left, it's a very authoritarian approach.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You know, you got the ULEZ, the road constrictions, banning certain adverts, changing the names of roads and stations.
Yeah, and if he had his way, he'd be telling us, what we should eat every day. Oh, wait a minute, and what adverts we should look at. Hang on, he does that, doesn't he? See me. Yes. Listen, David, you live in London. You have a direct stake in Mayor Sadiq Khan.
Yes.
And yet he's won 3 elections.
Yes.
So is he an artful politician, or is it just always going to be the case now that London votes Labour?
I really don't know, but someone's got to really come in and make some changes and be very involved in social media. But can I say one more thing, Nick?
Yeah.
I think, Nick, the chickens are going to come home to roost with Sadiq Khan because lots of people who own cars have put up with it. But as their cars age and they need to renew them, or van drivers or whatever, they're not going to renew them. But the economy of London needs people to use the roads. And this is going to be really serious over the next few years.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. And actually, I think it's a problem with the government because I actually think that they talk about growth, but so many of their measures, by design or by actual just not thinking it through, are anti-growth. And I think that's what you're facing in London. The impact, for example, of the white van it's all over London, doing the deliveries, the plumbers, all of these people. You can't get on the tube and carry your tools, and yet you're having to pay a lot of money for the privilege of driving in and around London. Some really good points, David. Thank you for being patient and joining us here on Talk with me, Nick Bois, in for Peter Cardwell. You can join the conversation at 0344 499 1000. I now want to go through, though, quite a few messages. I'll just pick off a few here before we go to the break. My dad, this is from Samantha, has just said if he was Trump, after all the things that Khan, Lammy, David Lammy, Foreign Secretary, Mandelson, the ambassador to America very soon, and numerous other Labour MPs have said about him, he would definitely send a message to Starmer by vetoing Mandelson as ambassador. There must be a point where Trump must get fed up with all the abuse from Labour MPs. I guess the question is, does he really pay any attention? I think his advisers are paying attention. Nick, Labour are a running joke. Trump is going to show them how they should act politically. Unfortunately, Labour won't change and keep us in. Ben from Plymouth. This is interesting. NHS and the uniforms. I was talking about actually how I really found it very hard, and I spent 12 days in Harlow Hospital, which honestly I could do 3 hours on a programme on that, identifying who was who. It can be hard to know who to approach. The only way to know who to speak to is the darker the blue tunic's uniform are, you're talking to the right person. If the person has pale blue uniform, you're talking to a nursing assistant. Thank you, Julie. And I hope anyone else is, well, you probably all knew. I just didn't. Good afternoon, Nick. I've never been a fan of Trump, but after recent events in the UK, i.e. the general election, I confess that I have warmed to Trump, looking forward to seeing what he does. Here's one from Andrew in Salisbury. Can't complain about my local NHS. It's the best it's ever been. Whatever you do to the NHS, it would be pointless without kicking out the hard left. Like the BBC, railways, etc., the NHS is just one big cash cow and bolt hole for them, 180 billion. Okay, if we did change our system to a Dutch-style health service, I guarantee they will find a way to control it. Let's have your views, your voice messages. In fact, just before we go to the break, I'll play one from Ian on the NHS crisis.
Hi Nick, it's Ian from East Grinstead. Listening to those nurses whose actual experiences on the ward should be listened to, it just shows what a complete mess the NHS is. And all the governments of both colours do is throw more money at it, thinks it's going to get better. Actually, the rubbish staff need to be thrown out and the other staff need to be educated, and actually patient care needs to come first. And we need an American system. Charge people if they use the NHS, and if they don't pay, they don't get treated.
The only thing I disagree with you, Ian, there is I wouldn't follow the American model. But actually, your point about a charge, whether you were like in France, you actually pay 30 euros sometimes to go and see a doctor, but you get 70% of it back through your insurance scheme or whatever. You have a stake in it. And that, I think, will make all the difference. How many prescriptions do you think we issue for paracetamol, for ibuprofen? And you can go and buy it for about 30p from your local pharmacist. It's madness. 0344 499 1000.
But they all said that when they were talking Villa, it wasn't he knew exactly what was going on with regard to the team, the transfers, how they've been playing, and he did say that as soon as he got home, he'd be watching the game. Luckily, that Aston Villa won 1-0, so that would have pleased him, and as it did me as well. But he shows that when it comes to Aston Villa, this is not a fake fan moment.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Keep those comments coming about the NHS, particularly Nick. I worked in the NHS back in the late 70s. The hospital was run efficiently as there was a matron. They employed their own maintenance, cleaners, kitchen staff. There was no diseases or infections. The use of private outsourcing is costing the taxpayer more. It doesn't make sense, says Sue from Macclesfield. And how many years have we been talking about matrons? Right. Max Scott from Talk Sport, you are here presumably to honour the fact that Liverpool are just walking away with the title.
Well, unfortunately, as a Nottingham Forest fan, I do need to probably admit that we're somehow, third in the league.
Well, it's pretty impressive you're about third, to
incredibly
be
so. I was actually at the City Ground for Forest Anfield. What an atmosphere that was. But an incredible day for Liverpool yesterday. I mean, it was in stark contrast to Arsenal. Liverpool have this huge amount of strength in depth, and it looks like it was going to be one of those days where the title race is blown wide open yet again.
You see, I said yesterday, I know this is going to sort of bore you a little bit, but I said in the morning that, to a good friend of mine, ex-MP, former MP for Enfield Southgate, guy called David Burris, who's passionate about Arsenal. I said, this is your day. You can close in on the title because Brentford are going to challenge us in their home ground, which they did, even though we won 2-0. But this is it, Arsenal. Go and beat Villa, and you're there. And they blew it. It's just hilarious.
It looks like it. I mean,
why did they blow it?
Look, my hypothesis, which is sort of widely shared by the footballing community, is that Arsenal under Mikel Arteta have assembled a fantastic team. They're right on every season now for Champions League football, which for a long time they weren't. But they have not invested in an out-and-out goal-scoring striker. Sadly, Gabriel Jesus ruptured his ACL against Manchester United in the FA Cup the week before, and so they're unable really to close off those games. And ironically, it was an Arsenal fan in Ollie Watkins who scored the second goal. Woeful defending from Arsenal. On the other hand, you've got Liverpool backs against the wall against Brentford, who until recently have been absolutely fabulous at home. Until recently were unbeaten
Liverpool
at home.
Lucky in the end? Did they catch a break, or was it just their sheer persistence?
You create your own luck. Alexander-Arnold proven again what a wonderful right back he is in terms of his assists.
When he turns up to play, which of course they say his mind was off a couple of games ago.
Look, I think that's sort of colleagues of mine. Perhaps I'm guilty of it sometimes, trying to concoct something interesting to say about Trent Alexander-Arnold.
He just had a bad day.
He'd had a bad day previously, but he saved the game for Liverpool, and now they are 6 points clear at the top of the league with the game in hand.
Game in hand.
Yes.
It's all over for Arsenal. Just want to repeat that. Let me just say again, it's all over for Arsenal. Anyway, what's coming up today?
Well, today, there's some really interesting games later on. We've got Manchester City against Ipswich. Fascinating fixture. Erling Haaland will put on the Sky Blue of City for the first time since he signed that 9.5-year contract.
Yeah, that's unusual.
Which is staggering. Interestingly, to sort of take this a bit more current affairsy, obviously there is this historic case against Manchester City for these 115 charges, and the fact that they're able to secure Erling Haaland on a £500,000 a week contract, rising to 750 grand based on image rights, suggests that they are quietly confident
they're going to win and not be relegated.
Well, maybe not that they'll win, but they won't be relegated. There are murmurs and rumours around a potential transfer ban, which is why we might see, and this is speculation, but we might see Manchester City buying more players in this January window while they can. So that's later on, but we have got some great games. Manchester United against Brighton. Manchester United looking...
Are they on the way back?
It's so difficult to say. What I would say is I do think Ruben Amorim is the mercurial figure to finally bring back the glory days to United. It's going to take time, but they're looking for their first back-to-back wins in the Premier League in months against Brighton, who have been in some really terrible form until last week, got their first win in 9 games. So that one's really quite open at Old Trafford. And then, of course, my beloved Nottingham Forest taking on bottom of the table Southampton to go level on points with Arsenal and potentially, I'm sure you'd disagree, Nick, but keep their unexpected title hopes alive.
No, they won't have title hopes, but they could be in the top 4, couldn't they?
And which would be absolutely magic.
Which would be fantastic.
You know, bringing back the glory days of Brian Clough.
I remember when they went to Sweden and won, wasn't it?
Yeah, in Malmo.
Malmo, wasn't it?
1979. Of course, I wasn't alive at that time. But as a Forest fan, I'm
a little bitchy there. Hey, right.
I'm living off second-hand memories of my dad and granddad, and it's finally nice to be able to relive those memories.
Yeah, no, I wish them well. I mean, Southampton, of course, was Rishi Sunak's club, and if they get relegated, that's like sort of a bit poetic justice.
He won't be getting as many political points turning up to championship games, will he? But yeah, no, that's an interesting one. So some transfer news actually for you, Nick. We have it on good authority at talkSport
that Rishi Sunak is going to join Southampton.
that Southampton are struggling that bad that they need a speedy wing back and they're going to get Rishi in. No, it's that Manchester United, who are very close in terms of PSR and their financial books.
Yes.
They really need
PSR being
profit and sustainability rules.
Okay.
And they really need to offload some of their highly paid players. Of course, Marcus Rashford came out in that shock interview with talkSport's Henry Winter saying that he wants out of his boyhood club. There was talks that he could go to AC Milan, but they're also looking to loan Kyle Walker from Manchester City, and because of Brexit, rules determine that they can only loan one player from outside the EU. AC Milan have snubbed Marcus Rashford, and it's understood now that Borussia Dortmund are sort of confident that they can get him on a loan deal. They've got a great track record of English players going there, resurrecting their careers and doing incredibly well. And also another player at Manchester United is Anthony. He's famously been an absolute, wet squib at United on massive wages. And it's understood that Real Betis are willing to take him and pay most of his wages, which just alleviates a little bit of that pressure.
This pressure to do it. Just a quick one for you. Liverpool transfers, contract signings, it's been really messy to most people outside. How would you explain what's going on there?
In terms of Mo Salah?
Well, so Salah, particularly Trent Alexander, it just has felt messy. But is there a strategy there?
No, it has been messy. You've got to remember that Jurgen Klopp announced his shock retirement right at the time when Liverpool should have been renegotiating Salah, Van Dijk and Trent Alexander-Arnold's contract. It's a huge oversight from them. They then had a temporary sporting director in. Somehow, I don't know how, but this has been sort of fell through the cracks, and now we're in a situation where 3 of the best players in the world, let alone 3 of Liverpool's stars, could be on the verge of leaving. But we think that Salah and Van Dijk are pretty dead set.
Van Dijk goes, we're in trouble. Listen, I know you've got to go. Thank you very much for letting me revel in a bit of happiness there. That was Max Scott, talkSport reporter. And now we're going to hear Susan on the NHS crisis.
Hi, Talk. On the subject of the NHS and people using it when there's nothing wrong with them, actually, I would put the onus on the staff and the NHS itself. There's nothing wrong with a person, tell them to go away. It's as simple as that. People will try, it's like toddlers. They'll always try it on. Problem solved.
Yeah, Susan, brilliant observation. Do you know what I think works against that common sense approach you've taken? It's this kind of risk, fear factor that comes in, is that, oh my goodness, we need to check everything, we could end up getting sued or something like this. And there's that I'm afraid has grown ever since we've started suing the NHS. And of course the risk factor now weighs heavily, and I think that creates a huge burden on the NHS just because they will go to perhaps, and I'm not a clinician, so it's easy for me to say this, to a level that is perhaps unnecessary, which could be contributing to that. Yes, says Susan Saunders, I'm really looking forward to Trump to shake up our government of clowns. I'd love to see Trump refuse pro-European Mandelson and put Starmer at the back of the queue until he starts to show USA respect and drop this ridiculous entry to Europe by stealth, says Sue in Cambridge. I mean, It's quite interesting, really, what you're saying there, Susan. I don't want Trump to put us at the back of the queue for our own national reasons, but like you, a slap on the wrist, there would be a little bit of Schadenfreude in there, wouldn't there be? Let's go to Leslie in Northwood. Hello, Leslie.
Hello.
Hello. I think you'll probably be the last call of the day, but thank you for ringing, Leslie.
Oh, thank you for accepting my call.
Pleasure. What would you like to say?
Well, what I would like to say is, in terms of the NHS, one of the things that needs to be looked at is the expenditure on managers.
Mm-hmm.
They give themselves inflated pay rises, but I believe there is a lot of money spent on managers that is equal to the amount spent on nurses. But I don't know that for certain, but it is.
I think the statistic is not far off there. It's also in number of them.
Yes, and I think you could cut those by a quarter and nobody would notice. And I started in the NHS in 1971, before we had general management. And when general management came in, you understand you need good finance people and what have you. A lot of clinical staff, like myself, we had to give up direct clinical work, not a lot, but we did have to give up so we could educate the managers about what's needed. And that still goes on.
Now, the most obvious targets for managers are people like the success on... or listen, actually, have you got a radio on in the background there, Leslie? I think I can hear it. Or
No,
TV?
I've got your programme.
Would you mind, I don't recommend this all the time, would you mind turning the volume down or off, because we're getting echo back here?
Right, okay, sorry.
That's all right. No, that's okay. Can you still hear me? You got
hang on.
Yeah, well, that's okay. You got the right button there. Nothing like a last-minute drama here. I said, okay, Leslie, I think you've done it. Well done.
Sorry, this is pathetic. I'm going to have to call my husband to come.
No, this drama, I can't cope with it. Don't worry. Please don't worry, Leslie. We're going to be finishing the show very, very shortly. But your point is well made. So thank you, Leslie. From Northwood, where I used to live when I was very, very young. Big RAF military base out there. RAF Northwood, of course. That was Leslie, along with her television, giving you an echo of my voice. That must have been very shocking for you to listen to. What I really want to say is